The champagne was flowing. The laughter was deafening, but it all came to a sickening halt with a single tap on a microphone. Liam Sterling, a man whose net worth was eclipsed only by his ego, stood before 100 of their closest friends and business partners. He raised a glass not to his beautiful 5 months pregnant wife Clara, but to her public execution. With a smile that never reached his eyes, he announced their divorce. By sunrise, the glittering life Clara knew was gone, and she was a refugee, her only sanctuary, the one place she never expected the doorstep of the woman whose son had just destroyed her. The air in the Sterling mansion hummed with the electric current of manufactured joy. It was a symphony of clinking crystal, a murmur of expensive pleasantries, and the ghost of a $1,000-an-hour jazz trio weaving through the opulent rooms. The house itself was a monument to modern wealth, a stark statement of glass and steel perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. From the infinity pool that bled into the horizon to the curated art that hung on the walls, a Rothko here, a de Kooning there, everything was designed to impress, to intimidate, to declare that Liam Sterling was not just a man, but an empire. Clara Sterling, swathed in a bespoke Valentino gown of deep sapphire silk that draped elegantly over the gentle swell of her pregnancy, moved through the throng like a phantom hostess. She was the other masterpiece in Liam's collection. Her smile was practiced, her laughter a delicate chime, her hand a cool, steady presence on the arm of a senator or the back of a tech CEO. She was beautiful, poised, and perfectly curated to be the wife of a man like Liam. Tonight was the annual Sterling Foundation Gala, a night where Liam played the benevolent philanthropist, writing checks with a flourish that made the city's elite applaud his generosity. For Clara, it was just another performance. For 5 years she had played this role. She had learned to navigate the treacherous waters of high society, to differentiate between a genuine smile and a baring of teeth. She had learned to ignore the subtle condescension in the eyes of women who saw her as little more than a trophy, a beautiful woman from a good but not wealthy family who had won the ultimate prize. Their love story, as Liam liked to tell it, was a fairy tale. The brilliant, self-made billionaire sweeping the charming art history graduate off her feet. He had showered her with a life she couldn't have imagined: private jets to Paris for brunch, front row seats at Milan Fashion Week, a black Amex card with no conceivable limit. In return, she gave him her grace, her quiet intelligence, and a veneer of class that his new money desperately craved. And soon she would give him an heir. But the gilded cage, no matter how spacious, was still a cage. The fairy tale had long since revealed its darker chapters. Liam's affection was conditional, his praise a tool for manipulation. He was a man of immense charm and chilling coldness, often in the same breath. He praised her impeccable taste when she decorated their home, but would fly into a quiet, terrifying rage if she moved a single object without his permission. He called her his queen in public, but in private he chipped away at her confidence with a sculptor's precision, isolating her from her old friends and making her entirely dependent on his world. Darling Liam's voice, smooth as single malt scotch, cut through her thoughts. He appeared at her side, his hand landing on the small of her back. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was an act of possession. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a Tom Ford suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his eyes the color of a stormy sea. "You look breathtaking, the perfect Madonna." The compliment, with its thinly veiled reference to her pregnancy, sent a familiar chill down her spine. To Liam, this baby wasn't a product of love. It was the ultimate acquisition. The Sterling heir. The continuation of his legacy. "Thank you, Liam," she murmured, forcing a smile. "It's a wonderful party. The foundation will be very pleased." "The foundation is me," he said, his smile tightening. "Don't forget that." He leaned in his voice, a low whisper against her ear. "Did you speak to Mr. Dubois about the museum wing?" "Yes," she said, her own voice barely audible. He was non-committal. He said the board was still considering other patrons. Liam's fingers tightened on her back, a painful pinch hidden by the fabric of her gown. "Non-committal is not the answer I wanted. I've pledged $10 million. See to it that he becomes committed. You're good at that. Charming people." Before she could respond, he had turned away, his public persona slipping back into place as he greeted a new arrival with a booming laugh. Clara took a steadying breath, her hand instinctively going to her belly. She felt a faint flutter, a tiny reassuring kick. "It's you and me, little one," she thought, a wave of fierce, protective love washing over her. "It will all be worth it for you." She surveyed the room. The faces were a blur of familiar power players. The Athertons, whose family had practically built the city. The formidable Jessica Vance, a hedge fund manager who could make or break companies with a single phone call. They were all here orbiting her husband, the brilliant son, at the center of this glittering, ruthless universe. They were all witnesses, though they didn't know it yet, to the final brutal act of her marriage. She caught sight of her reflection in the vast floor-to-ceiling window. A woman in a sapphire dress, a silhouette against the endless dark ocean. She looked serene, untouchable, a perfect illusion. But inside, a quiet scream was building, a desperate yearning for something real, something more than this beautiful hollow life. She was lonely in a room full of people, a prisoner in her own home. She just didn't know that the walls of her prison were about to be spectacularly, cruelly demolished. The evening wore on, a relentless performance of social graces. Clara had managed to corner Jean-Pierre Dubois, the wizened director of the city's art museum. She'd deployed the full force of her charm, speaking passionately about the importance of public art. Her knowledge of the Impressionists, her master's thesis topic, lending her an air of authority that temporarily eclipsed her status as just Liam Sterling's wife. She thought she had made headway. She thought she had done her duty. As the jazz trio took a break, a hush fell over the crowd. Liam had moved to the small raised platform near the grand piano, a champagne flute in one hand, a microphone in the other. A warm, expectant spotlight found him. This was a familiar part of the script. Liam's speech was the highlight of the gala the moment he would announce the staggering sum raised and pledge even more of his own fortune, cementing his godlike status in the city's philanthropic circles. Clara stood near the edge of the crowd, a polite smile fixed on her face. She felt a sense of relief. The night was almost over. Soon the guests would depart, the mask would come off, and she could retreat into the quiet solitude of her wing of the mansion. "Thank you all for coming," Liam began, his voice resonating with practiced warmth. "Your generosity tonight has been, as always, overwhelming. Together we've raised an astonishing $12 million for children's literacy programs across the state." A wave of enthusiastic applause rippled through the room. Liam let it wash over him, a small satisfied smile playing on his lips. He looked out at the sea of adoring faces, his gaze sweeping over them before finally deliberately landing on Clara. His eyes were different. The practiced warmth was gone, replaced by an arctic chill that made the blood freeze in her veins. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Generosity is a funny thing. He continued, his tone shifting, becoming more intimate, more confessional. The crowd leaned in, sensing a change in the emotional weather. "We give our money, our time, our hearts. We invest in things we believe will bring us returns. A better community, a brighter future, a lasting legacy." He took a slow sip of his champagne, his eyes still locked on hers. She felt 100 pairs of eyes follow his gaze, turning to her. She was pinned by the weight of their collective stare. Her smile began to feel like a cracking facade. "I have always been a man who believes in cutting my losses," Liam said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "When an investment fails to yield its expected returns, when it becomes a liability, a smart businessman divests. He moves on to more profitable ventures. He doesn't throw good money after bad." A confused murmur rippled through the guests. This was not the usual self-congratulatory speech. This was something else entirely. Clara's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She could feel the color draining from her face. Tonight, as I stand here on the cusp of a new chapter for my foundation, I have decided to apply that same principle to my personal life. He paused, letting the silence stretch, wringing every drop of drama from the moment. Then he raised his glass. But he wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. He was looking directly at Clara, a cruel, triumphant smirk twisting his handsome features. "So I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, his voice ringing with a terrifying clarity that cut through the silence. "To a new beginning, and to the end of my marriage. Clara and I will be divorcing." The words hit the room like a physical blow. There was a collective gasp, a shocked, disbelieving intake of breath. The air crackled with scandal. Jean-Pierre Dubois' jaw was slack. Jessica Vance's perfectly arched eyebrows shot up to her hairline. Every single guest was staring, their faces a mixture of horror, pity, and a raw, undisguised hunger for the drama unfolding before them. For Clara, the world dissolved into a meaningless roar. The clinking of glasses, the whispers, the faces, it all blurred into an impressionistic nightmare. The only thing in focus was Liam's face, his expression of cold, calculated victory. He had done this deliberately. Not in the sterile quiet of a lawyer's office, but here, in front of everyone. He hadn't just ended their marriage, he had stripped her of her dignity piece by painful piece in the most public way imaginable. He was making an example of her. He was branding her as a failed investment. Her hand flew to her belly, a desperate, instinctual gesture to protect the only thing that mattered. She could feel her baby, a tiny, innocent life, caught in the crossfire of this monstrous act. The room began to spin. The sapphire dress felt like a lead weight dragging her down. The air was thick, unbreathable. She saw a flicker of movement. Chloe, her one true friend in this sea of acquaintances, was pushing through the crowd towards her, her face a mask of fury. But Clara couldn't wait. She couldn't stand there for one more second and endure the pitying stares, the salacious whispers. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she turned. She didn't run. She walked. Head held high back, ramrod straight, she moved through the stunned, parting crowd. Each step was an agony, each beat of her heart, a hammer blow of humiliation. She walked past the Rothko, past the grand piano, past the jazz trio who stood frozen with their instruments. She walked out of the grand hall, away from the wreckage of her life, the sound of her husband's voice now trying to calm the chaos he had unleashed, fading behind her like a bad dream. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to get away. The silence of the long white corridor was a deafening roar compared to the chaos she had left behind. Clara's stilettos clicked against the polished marble, the sound echoing the frantic, unsteady rhythm of her heart. She didn't look back. She couldn't. To look back would be to see the faces, the whispers, the ruin. She reached their private wing of the mansion, the space that was supposed to be a sanctuary. The door slid open with a soft, expensive hiss. Inside, everything was pristine, sterile, and cold. A massive California king bed, a walk-in closet the size of a small apartment filled with clothes she would never wear again, and a panoramic window showcasing a city that suddenly felt alien and hostile. For a moment she stood frozen in the center of the room, her body trembling uncontrollably. A single dry sob escaped her lips, a harsh, ugly sound in the crushing silence. Humiliation washed over her in hot, sickening waves. He had done it on purpose. He had planned it. The speech, the timing, the audience. It was all a calculated act of psychological warfare. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had immolated her entire existence. Her gaze fell upon a silver-framed photograph on her bedside table. It was from their honeymoon in Santorini, a carefully staged shot of them laughing, the Aegean Sea a brilliant blue behind them. Liam's arm was wrapped around her, his smile blinding. It was all a lie. A beautiful, meticulously crafted lie. With a sudden, violent surge of rage, she swept the photograph off the table. It crashed against the far wall, the glass shattering into 1,000 tiny pieces, just like her life. The rage gave way to a chilling clarity. She couldn't stay here. This wasn't her home anymore. It was a mausoleum of a dead marriage. Every object, every surface was tainted with his presence, with the memory of his cruelty. She had to leave, now. Her eyes scanned the room looking for what to take. What do you take when you're leaving a life of infinite possessions? The jewelry, the designer bags, the art. It was all meaningless. It was all his. It was all part of the gilded cage. She went to the closet and ignored the rows of Chanel and Dior. At the very back, behind a rack of evening gowns, was a small, worn leather suitcase. It was the one she had brought with her when she first moved in 5 years ago. Inside were a few old sweaters, a pair of comfortable jeans, a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, and a faded photograph of her parents. It was a relic from a life before Liam, a life that was her own. Her hands shook as she pulled it out. She stripped off the Valentino gown, letting it pool on the floor like a puddle of spilled ink. She changed into the jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, the familiar comfort of the fabric a small solace. She packed essentials, her mind working on a frantic, desperate autopilot. A toothbrush, her prenatal vitamins, the small amount of cash in her wallet, her phone, and her passport. She took one last look at the glittering prison around her. Then she walked out without a second glance. She bypassed the main elevators, taking a service stairwell at the back of the wing, her footsteps echoing in the cold concrete shaft. Her only thought was to escape the property before Liam or his security team could stop her. His control was absolute. He would likely cancel her credit cards, her car access, everything. She emerged into the cool night air near the staff parking lot. The party was still in full swing, the sound of it a distant, grotesque hum. She pulled her phone out, her fingers fumbling with the screen. She had no one to call. Her parents were on a cruise in the Mediterranean, a trip Liam had gifted them. Her old friends. She had let those connections wither under the suffocating shadow of her marriage. There was Chloe. But Chloe was still inside, likely trying to find her. Calling her would only draw attention. Then a name surfaced in her mind. A long shot. A desperate last-ditch idea born of sheer panic. Catherine Sterling, Liam's mother. They had a strained formal relationship. Catherine was old money, a woman of quiet, formidable dignity who lived in a sprawling, slightly faded estate in the Hudson Valley, a world away from Liam's sleek, modern empire. She had always been polite to Clara, but there was a distance, a reservation in her eyes. Catherine had never seemed to fully approve of her son's ostentatious lifestyle, or perhaps of the woman who had become a part of it. But Clara also remembered a moment, a brief conversation a year ago at Christmas. Liam had made a casually cruel remark about Clara's family, and she had seen a flicker of something in Catherine's eyes, a sharp, unmistakable disapproval directed at her own son. It was a fleeting moment, but it had stuck with her. It was a crazy, desperate gamble. What would she say? "Hello, Catherine, your son just publicly humiliated me and I'm pregnant and homeless. Can I come stay?" But where else could she go? She had a few $1,000s in cash. It wouldn't last long. She needed a safe harbor, a place to think, to breathe, to figure out what to do next. With a trembling finger, she opened the ride-sharing app on her phone. She typed in the address for the nearest private airfield. She knew Liam kept a small jet there for short-haul trips. It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, his pilots would be loyal to a paycheck, not to him. No, that was a foolish idea. He would have them on his payroll. She changed the destination to the main airport, JFK. It was a start. She would fly to New York, and from there she would figure it out. She booked a ticket on the first red-eye flight, a commercial flight, something she hadn't done in 5 years. The car arrived minutes later, a nondescript sedan. As she slipped into the back seat, she glanced back at the mansion one last time. It was a glittering beacon of power and wealth on the cliffside, her prison. And as the car pulled away, melting into the darkness of the Pacific Coast Highway, Clara didn't feel sadness. She felt a terrifying, exhilarating rush of freedom. The flight was just beginning. The 6-hour flight to New York was a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. Clara sat huddled in a window seat in economy class. a baseball cap pulled low over her face, the unfamiliar proximity of strangers, a strange comfort after the cavernous isolation of her former life. She didn't sleep. Her mind replayed Liam's words, his smug, cruel face, over and over again. Each replay was a fresh stab of pain, but with each stab a layer of shock peeled away, revealing a hard, cold core of anger. She landed at JFK as the sun was casting a pale, watery light over the city. The raw, chaotic energy of New York was a jolt to her senses. For a moment, she felt completely, terrifyingly alone. A pregnant woman with a small suitcase, a few $1,000s, and the ruins of a life in her wake. The impulse to find an anonymous hotel and hide was overwhelming, but the image of Catherine Sterling's face, that flicker of disapproval towards her son, returned to her. It was the only sliver of hope she had. Taking a deep breath, she rented a car using her debit card, praying Liam hadn't thought to cancel it yet, and began the 2-hour drive north into the heart of the Hudson Valley. As she left the city behind, the landscape softened into rolling hills and lush greenery. The houses grew farther apart, replaced by grand old estates hidden behind stone walls and ancient trees. It was a different kind of wealth from the sharp-edged, ostentatious world she had left behind in California. This was old, quiet, and deeply entrenched. She found the address easily. A pair of imposing but slightly rusted wrought iron gates stood open at the end of a long gravel driveway. The sign read, Blackwood Manor. It was Catherine's family home, a name that carried a weight Liam's Sterling never could. The house came into view, and it took her breath away. It wasn't a sleek glass box. It was a magnificent rambling stone manor, covered in ivy and steeped in history. It was beautiful, but in a way that felt real, lived in, and slightly melancholic. It looked like a house that had seen generations of life, of joy and of sorrow. Her courage faltered. She sat in the rental car at the end of the driveway for a full 10 minutes, her hands gripping the steering wheel. What was she doing? Catherine could slam the door in her face. She could call Liam. She could tell her she had made her bed and now she had to lie in it. No, she told herself, her hand dropping to her belly. You're not just doing this for you. The thought of her child gave her the final push she needed. She put the car in drive and crunched slowly up the gravel path. She parked the car and walked to the massive oak front door. Before she could even knock, it swung open. Catherine Sterling stood in the doorway. She was a tall, slender woman in her late 60s, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She was wearing simple linen trousers and a cashmere sweater, a stark contrast to the designer labels she wore at Liam's events. Her face, etched with fine lines, was calm, her blue eyes sharp and intelligent. There was no shock on her face, no surprise, only a deep, weary sadness. I was wondering when you would arrive, Catherine said, her voice calm and steady. I saw the news alerts. The gossip sites are having a field day. It's utterly barbaric. Clara stared at her, speechless. She had expected shouting accusations, at the very least a barrage of questions. Not this quiet, solemn acceptance. Come in, child, Catherine said, gently stepping aside. You look exhausted. Clara stepped over the threshold and the door closed behind her, shutting out the world. The inside of the house was just as she had imagined. It was filled with antique furniture, worn oriental rugs, shelves overflowing with books, and the scent of old wood and beeswax. A fire crackled in a large stone hearth, and 2 golden retrievers lifted their heads from the rug, thumping their tails in a lazy welcome. The dam of composure Clara had so carefully constructed for the past 12 hours finally broke. A choked sob escaped her, and her legs felt weak. Catherine was there in an instant. Her arms, surprisingly strong, wrapped around Clara, holding her steady. It's all right, she murmured, her voice losing its formal edge, becoming something softer, something maternal. You're safe here. He can't touch you here. She led the weeping Clara to a comfortable armchair by the fire and disappeared for a moment, returning with a cup of steaming chamomile tea. Drink this, she commanded gently. There will be time for talk later. First, you need to rest. Clara drank the tea, the warmth seeping into her cold, trembling hands. She looked at her mother-in-law, truly looked at her perhaps for the first time. She saw not the distant, formal matriarch, but a woman whose eyes held a profound, deep-seated disappointment, not in Clara, but in her own child. "Why," Clara whispered the question, raw and ragged. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Catherine sat down in the chair opposite her, her gaze unwavering. "Because you are carrying my grandchild," she said, her voice firm. "And because no woman deserves what my son did to you. What he did was not just cruel. It was vulgar. It was the act of a man I no longer recognize." She leaned forward, her expression hardening. "I have been estranged from Liam in spirit, if not in fact, for many years. I watched him become a caricature of wealth, a man obsessed with power and image. I tried to warn him. I tried to guide him. But he is his father's son in all the ways that matter least." A log in the fireplace shifted and popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "Liam may have his father's business acumen," Catherine continued, her voice laced with a bitterness that stunned Clara, "but he also has his cruelty. And his secrets. I imagine you have many questions, and I promise you, Clara, I will help you find the answers. But more than that, I will help you fight. He has underestimated you, and he has most certainly underestimated me." In that moment, sitting in the warm, firelit living room of a woman she barely knew, Clara felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years' hope. She was not alone. She had found not just a sanctuary, but an ally, an unlikely, formidable, and powerful ally. The war was far from over, but for the first time she felt like she might just have a chance of winning. The first few days at Blackwood Manor were a cocoon of quiet recuperation. Catherine was a constant, unobtrusive presence. She made sure Clara ate, that she slept in a comfortable guest room with a view of the sprawling gardens, and that she was left alone with her thoughts when she needed to be. They spoke little of Liam. Instead, Catherine shared stories of the house of her family, of a world that valued legacy over currency and character over charisma. Clara felt herself slowly unfurling, the tight knot of terror and humiliation in her chest beginning to loosen. She took long walks through the gardens, the crisp autumn air a balm to her frayed nerves. She read books from Catherine's vast library, losing herself in worlds far from her own. For the first time in years, she felt the space to simply be. One crisp afternoon, about a week after her arrival, Catherine found her sitting on a stone bench overlooking the Hudson River. "You have your color back," Catherine observed, sitting beside her. "That's good to see." "I feel more human," Clara admitted. "Thank you, Catherine, for everything." "It's the least I can do," Catherine said, her gaze fixed on the river. "But peace and quiet will only get us so far. Liam will have made his move by now." As if on cue, Clara's phone, which had been blessedly silent, buzzed. It was an email from a law firm she didn't recognize, Harrison and Shaw. The subject line was chillingly simple: Sterling v. Sterling. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was a formal notice. Liam had officially filed for divorce. Attached was a document outlining the terms of his proposed settlement. Her blood ran cold as she read it. He was offering her a one-time payment of $1 million. In exchange, she was to sign a comprehensive NDA, relinquish all claims to any of their shared assets, and this was the part that made her feel physically ill, agree to grant him sole legal and physical custody of their unborn child upon its birth. He cited her emotional instability, evidenced by her abrupt and dramatic departure from their home, as grounds for her being an unfit mother. The monster, Clara whispered, the phone slipping from her numb fingers. "He wants to take my baby." Catherine picked up the phone and read the email, her expression hardening into one of cold fury. "Harrison and Shaw," she said, her voice tight with contempt. "Of course. Richard Harrison is the most ruthless corporate lawyer in New York. He has no morals, only billable hours. This is not a divorce proceeding, Clara. This is a hostile takeover." She stood up, her posture radiating a sudden intense energy. "I knew he would do something like this. He's trying to scare you. He's trying to break you before the fight even begins." "What do I do?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. $1 million sounds like a lot, but compared to his wealth. "And my baby. I can't." "You will do nothing," Catherine stated firmly. "You will not respond. You will not panic. You will let me handle this. We are not going to play defense. We are going to attack." She led Clara back to the house, to a grand wood-paneled study that smelled of leather and old paper. From a locked drawer in a massive mahogany desk, she retrieved a thick leather-bound ledger. "Liam thinks his empire is impenetrable," Catherine said, opening the ledger on the desk. "He thinks because he built it, he understands all its weaknesses. He is wrong." She turned the ledger towards Clara. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting and columns of figures. "Liam's father, my late husband, was a brilliant but reckless man. When he died, he left a financial mess that was far more precarious than anyone knew. I spent 2 years with accountants and lawyers quietly cleaning it up. In the process, I learned to read the bones of a business. And I have been keeping my own private accounts of Liam's businesses ever since he took over." Clara looked at her, stunned. "You've been tracking his finances?" "A mother worries," Catherine said with a grim smile. "Especially when her son worships at the altar of risk." "Liam's company. Sterling Industries is a house of cards, Clara. It looks magnificent from the outside, but its foundations are built on a mountain of debt and dangerously over-leveraged assets. He's been using short-term loans to finance long-term projects, juggling payments, robbing Peter to pay Paul. The market has been good to him, so he's stayed afloat. But a downturn, a single major project failure, and the whole thing could collapse." She pointed to a specific entry in the ledger. "Look here. The Azure Sky development in Dubai. He's sunk nearly $500 million of borrowed money into it. The project has been plagued by delays and whispers of corruption with local officials. It's his biggest gamble, and from what my sources tell me, it is on the verge of catastrophic failure." The pieces started to click into place in Clara's mind. Liam's increasing paranoia, his obsession with the museum wing donation, a desperate attempt to maintain his image of success, and the public brutal divorce. "The prenup," Clara said suddenly. "We have a prenuptial agreement. I barely read it at the time. I was in love, I didn't care." "Let me guess," Catherine said. "It entitles you to a significant settlement, something like $50 million in the event of a divorce, unless you are the one to be unfaithful, or are deemed to be at fault." Clara nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, but I haven't done anything." "Exactly," Catherine replied. "He couldn't find a reason to invoke the clause, so he created one. By humiliating you so publicly, he hoped you would react hysterically, irrationally, fleeing in the middle of the night, disappearing. He's painting you as unstable, the at-fault party. He's trying to get out of the divorce for pennies on the dollar because he doesn't have the $50 million to give you. He is financially hemorrhaging." The audacity of the scheme was breathtaking. It wasn't just about cruelty, it was about cold, hard cash. He was willing to destroy her to take their child to save himself from financial ruin. "But what about the baby?" Clara asked, her voice thick with horror. "The baby is his trump card," Catherine said, her voice grim. "His ace in the hole. If he has the sterling heir, his investors, his bankers, they will see continuity. They will see a future. The legacy is secured even if the balance sheets are bleeding red. He thinks he can bully you into giving up your child, and in doing so, save his empire." Catherine closed the ledger with a decisive thud. "But we have something he doesn't know we have. We have the truth. And we have this." She tapped the leather-bound book. "This is our weapon. Richard Harrison can send all the threatening letters he wants. But he is about to come up against a lawyer of a very different caliber." She picked up the phone on her desk and dialed a number from memory. "Arthur, it's Catherine Blackwood," she said, her voice all business. "I have a situation here, a family matter. Yes, it involves my son. I need you to come to the manor. And Arthur, bring your sharpest teeth." She hung up the phone and looked at Clara, her eyes gleaming with a warrior's light. "Arthur Prescott is my family's lawyer. His family has represented my family for a century. He is semi-retired, but he despises corporate sharks like Harrison, and he loves a good fight. The game has changed, Clara. Liam wanted a war. Now he's going to get one." Arthur Prescott arrived the next morning. He was a man in his 70s with a shock of white hair, a tweed jacket, and eyes that twinkled with a shrewd intelligence that belied his grandfatherly appearance. He greeted Catherine with a warm hug, and Clara with a kind, reassuring smile. He listened intently for over 2 hours in the study as Catherine laid out the situation, presenting her ledger as evidence, while Clara recounted the story of the party and the threatening email from Liam's lawyer. When they were finished, Arthur sat back, steepling his fingers. "Despicable," he murmured, "and utterly desperate. This isn't a strategy, it's a Hail Mary pass. Liam is betting everything on your fear, Clara." He turned to her. "Our first step is to go on the offensive. We will file a countersuit. We will not only reject his insulting offer, but we will sue for the full amount stipulated in the prenuptial agreement. Furthermore, we will petition for sole custody for you, citing his act of extreme public cruelty as evidence of a character unfit to be a primary caregiver. We will paint him not as a powerful businessman, but as a reckless, emotionally abusive man who would publicly humiliate his pregnant wife to solve a cash flow problem." For the first time, Clara felt a surge of power. "Can we win?" "Winning is a matter of leverage," Arthur said, a glint in his eye. And thanks to Catherine's meticulous record-keeping, he nodded towards the ledger. "We have a great deal of it. Richard Harrison thinks this is a simple, brutal divorce. He has no idea we're about to put Sterling Industries under a microscope." The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal activity. Arthur's team filed the countersuit, and the response from Liam's camp was swift and furious. The letters from Harrison and Shaw became more frequent, more threatening. They accused Clara of being a gold digger, of having an affair, a baseless, easily disproven lie, of plotting to extort money from Liam. They demanded psychiatric evaluations. They tried to subpoena her long-distance phone records with her parents. Each letter was a fresh assault, but with Catherine and Arthur at her side, Clara found a new strength. She was no longer a frightened victim. She was a key player in a high-stakes battle for her future and her child's. She spent hours with Arthur going over her life with Liam, detailing every instance of his control, his emotional manipulation, his casual cruelty. It was painful, but also empowering. She was finally giving voice to the silent screams she had suppressed for years. Meanwhile, Liam was not idle. The story of the divorce gala had become a fixture in the gossip columns. Liam, a master of public relations, began to spin a new narrative. He gave a carefully curated interview to a major financial newspaper, painting himself as a heartbroken husband betrayed by a volatile, materialistic wife. He spoke of his profound desire to protect his unborn child from a damaging environment. His vast PR machine worked overtime to scrub the reality of what he'd done and replace it with a more palatable fiction. He also began to apply financial pressure. As predicted, Clara's debit card was declined. Her private accounts, which Liam had always funded, were frozen. The one-time payment of $1 million was dangled in front of her again and again by his lawyers, a tempting lifeline designed to make her give up. But Catherine was her fortress. "Let him," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand when Clara told her about the frozen accounts. "He is severing every tie that connects you to him. He is making you independent, and he's too foolish to see it. You are a resident of my home. You are my guest. You will want for nothing." One evening, a sleek black car came up the driveway. A man in a sharp suit delivered a large, beautifully wrapped box. It was from a high-end baby boutique in Manhattan. There was no note. Clara opened it to find an absurdly expensive layette cashmere onesies, tiny silver monogrammed booties, a blanket that probably cost more than her first car. It was a classic Liam move, a power play disguised as a gift, a reminder that he could provide for this child in a way she, now penniless, could not. It was meant to intimidate her to make her feel inadequate. She looked at the box with disgust. The old Clara would have been confused, maybe even touched by the gesture. The new Clara saw it for what it was, a threat. She walked the box out to the large trash receptacles at the side of the manor and dropped it inside with a satisfying thud. The battle for public opinion raged, but the real war was happening behind the scenes. Arthur's legal team filed a motion for discovery, demanding full access to the financial records of Sterling Industries, specifically citing concerns about the company's solvency and its ability to meet its obligations, including Liam's potential divorce settlement. This was the move that changed the game. It was a direct strike at the heart of Liam's empire. Harrison and Shaw fought it furiously, claiming it was an irrelevant fishing expedition. But a judge intrigued by the preliminary evidence Arthur presented granted the motion. The storm was gathering. Liam had started a fire thinking he could control the burn. Now the wind had changed direction and the flames were racing back towards his own house of cards. And in the quiet sanctuary of Blackwood Manor, Clara, her belly growing with the new life inside her, prepared for the final confrontation. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the legacy of truth and dignity that Catherine had shown her, and for the future of the child who deserved to be born into a world free of its father's toxic influence. The court-ordered discovery was a nuclear bomb dropped on Liam Sterling's empire. As Arthur's forensic accountants began to comb through the tangled web of Sterling Industries, the picture Catherine had painted became terrifyingly clear. It was worse than she had even suspected. The Dubai project was a black hole of debt, and Liam had been illegally moving funds from other corporate entities and even from the Sterling Foundation's accounts to keep it from collapsing before he could secure a new round of financing. The news sent shockwaves through the financial community. The carefully constructed image of Liam Sterling, the infallible Midas-touch billionaire, began to crack. His lenders grew nervous. His board of directors, once little more than a rubber stamp for his ambitions, started asking pointed questions. The PR machine could no longer contain the story. The narrative shifted from a messy celebrity divorce to a potential corporate implosion. Liam was cornered, and like a cornered animal, he became even more dangerous. He demanded a face-to-face meeting. Not with the lawyers, but with Clara. Alone. His lawyers framed it as a final good-faith attempt to resolve things amicably for the sake of the child. Arthur was vehemently opposed. "It's a trap, Clara. He's going to try to manipulate you, threaten you, anything to get you to call off the dogs." Catherine, however, had a different perspective. "She should go," she said, her eyes meeting Clara's. "But she will not go alone, and she will not go unprepared." Catherine looked at Clara, who was now nearly 7 months pregnant, her strength and resolve a palpable aura around her. "He still sees the woman you were, the quiet, accommodating girl he thought he could break. He has no idea who you've become. Let him see you. Let him see that his power over you is gone. Sometimes the only way to slay a dragon is to walk into its lair." The meeting was set for a neutral location, a private suite at the Carlyle Hotel in Manhattan. Arthur insisted on one condition: he would wait in the adjoining suite, and the entire meeting would be recorded. Liam's lawyers, desperate for any chance to stop the financial bleeding, reluctantly agreed. When Clara walked into the suite, Liam was already there, pacing in front of the window overlooking Central Park. He looked haggard. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, wired energy. There were dark circles under his eyes. He turned as she entered, and for a moment his mask slipped. He saw her, truly saw her. The swell of her belly prominent under a simple but elegant dress. Her face calm and composed. Her eyes clear and steady. There was no fear there. He had expected tears pleading. He was met with a serene strength that clearly unnerved him. "Clara," he said, his voice attempting its old familiar charm. "You look, well, I am," she replied, her voice even. She sat in an armchair, not waiting for him to invite her to do so. "Why did you want to see me, Liam?" He abandoned the pretense of pleasantries. "You have to stop this," he said, his voice a low, urgent hiss. "You and my mother and that fossil of a lawyer, you're destroying my company. You're destroying me." "You did this, Liam," she said, her voice remaining calm, cutting through his panic. You did this when you decided to announce our divorce like it was a corporate restructuring. You did this when you tried to take my child away from me to cover your financial mistakes. I did it to protect the legacy, he shot back, his voice rising. Our child's legacy. Everything I have built is for him. You don't understand the pressure, the stakes. I understand perfectly, Clara said, leaning forward slightly. I understand that you were about to lose everything, so you tried to get rid of me for a fraction of what our prenup dictated. I understand that you value your image more than your wife and your bottom line more than your son. That's not legacy, Liam. That's a pathology. He stared at her, flabbergasted. This was not the Clara he knew. The Clara he knew would have crumbled under his anger. He tried a different tack, his voice softening, becoming cloying. Bella, please. Think of the baby. He doesn't deserve to be born into this chaos, this public spectacle. Call it off. We can go back. Not to how it was, but to something new. We can co-parent. I'll give you a generous settlement. Anything. Just make it stop. Clara listened, and she felt nothing but a profound, hollow pity for the man in front of her. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about money. There is only one way this stops, Liam, she said, standing up. It was her turn to be in the position of power. You will give me the full $50 million as stipulated in the agreement. It will be placed in a trust managed by Arthur and myself for our son. You will agree to my having sole physical custody. You will be allowed supervised visitation conditional upon your continued good behavior and a court-mandated course of anger management therapy. She paused, letting the weight of her terms sink in. You will also issue a public apology, not to the media but to me, a real one. And finally, you will turn over all of Catherine's ledgers and our findings to the SEC. You will face the consequences of your own actions. He looked at her as if she had sprouted a second head. You're insane, he breathed. That would be suicide. They'll launch a full investigation. I could go to prison. That, Clara said, her voice as cold and hard as diamond, is not my problem. You built this house of cards, Liam. You can either let it fall on its own, or you can have a hand in how it's dismantled. Those are my terms. You have 24 hours to have your lawyer call mine. She turned and walked towards the door, her step steady and sure. Clara, wait, he called out, his voice cracking with desperation. Don't do this. I'm still your husband. I'm the father of your child. She stopped at the door and looked back at him, at the broken, desperate man standing in the wreckage of his own making. No, Liam, she said quietly. You were the man I married. You are the biological father of my son. But his father, that is a title you will have to earn. And you have a very, very long way to go. She walked out the door, leaving him alone in the silent, opulent suite, the full weight of his reckoning finally crashing down upon him. The storm had broken. Faced with utter ruin, Liam folded. 23 hours later, a humbled Richard Harrison called Arthur Prescott and agreed to all of Clara's terms. The public apology arrived by courier, a handwritten letter that was stilted and self-serving but met the technical requirement. The funds were transferred into the trust. The custody agreement was signed, and Arthur, true to their word, anonymously forwarded the damning evidence of Liam's financial crimes to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The downfall of Liam Sterling was swift and spectacular. The SEC investigation led to federal charges. The Dubai project collapsed, taking his company down with it. He was forced to sell the cliffside mansion, the private jet, the art collection, all of it consumed by debts and legal fees. The man who had stood on a stage and wielded his power like a weapon was reduced to a tabloid caricature, a modern-day Icarus who had flown too close to the sun. In the end, he was sentenced to 5 years in a minimum security federal prison. 2 months after the meeting at the Carlisle, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Nicholas after her own father, but gave him the middle name Blackwood, in honor of the woman who had become her anchor and her champion. She did not return to California. Blackwood Manor had become her home. The quiet rhythm of life there, punctuated by the gurgles and cries of her newborn son, was a healing balm. The vast, lonely mansion had been filled with a new kind of life. Her relationship with Catherine had blossomed into a deep and genuine bond. They were no longer just allies, they were family. Catherine, who had been a distant grandmother-in-waiting, was a doting hands-on grandmother. She would spend hours rocking Nicholas by the fire, telling him stories of the family he was born into. Not the sterling legacy of smoke and mirrors, but the Blackwood legacy of resilience, integrity, and quiet strength. Clara, for her part, found a new purpose. She was no longer defined by her husband or his wealth. She was a mother. She was the manager of her son's considerable trust, and she was rediscovering the woman she had been before Liam. With Catherine's encouragement, she enrolled in an online program at Columbia University to finish her PhD in art history. She began consulting for smaller museums and galleries, her passion for art rekindled. One sunny afternoon in early summer, she was sitting on the lawn with Catherine, watching 9-month-old Nicholas crawl determinedly through the grass. A letter had arrived that morning from a P.O. box in Pennsylvania. It was from Liam. She hadn't opened it. "Are you going to read it?" Catherine asked gently. Clara looked at the letter, then at her son, his face alight with the simple joy of discovering a dandelion. She thought of the man in the prison cell, the man who had tried to use this beautiful child as a pawn in his desperate game. She felt a pang, not of anger anymore, but of a distant, sad pity. "No," she said, tearing the letter in half and then in half again. "His story is over. Ours is just beginning." She had walked through fire and emerged not scorched but forged. The gilded cage had been destroyed, and in its place she had built a life, a real messy, beautiful, and authentic life. She had lost a millionaire husband, a hollow crown, and a life of luxurious emptiness. And in its place she had found something infinitely more valuable, a loving family, a true home, and most importantly, herself. The future was an unwritten page, and for the first time in a very long time, she was holding the pen. Clara's journey from a humiliated wife in a sapphire gown to a powerful, independent mother is a testament to the incredible strength of the human spirit. She didn't just survive the wreckage of her marriage, she rose from the ashes stronger, wiser, and in control of her own destiny. Her story proves that true power isn't found in billion-dollar bank accounts or public acclaim, but in resilience, integrity, and the unbreakable bonds of family we choose for ourselves. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments we have the power to rewrite our own narrative and build a new, more authentic beginning. What would you do if you had it all? The perfect marriage, a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a baby on the way. Now, what would you do if you discovered in a single heart-shattering moment that it was all built on a foundation of lies? For Isabella Rossi, the answer wasn't to scream or cry or even to leave. Her response was something far more terrifying. She found the woman sleeping with her husband, and she gave her a job. This isn't a story about forgiveness. It's a story about control, about a woman pushed to the edge who decided to rewrite her own tragedy, one calculated, devastating move at a time. The life Isabella Rossi had meticulously built was a masterpiece of modern success. At 34, she was the founder and CEO of Aura, a boutique marketing agency in the heart of the city that had become the go-to for luxury brands seeking an edge. Her office, a symphony of glass, chrome, and soft gray furnishings, overlooked the sprawling metropolis, a daily reminder of the heights she had climbed. Her apartment, a spacious loft in a converted warehouse district, was her sanctuary. It smelled of Jo Malone candles, freshly brewed espresso, and the faint sweet scent of the expensive prenatal lotions she now massaged into her burgeoning 7-month baby bump. Her husband, Ethan Hayes, was the final perfect brushstroke in this portrait of domestic bliss. Handsome, with a disarming smile and the easy confidence of a man who worked in high finance, he was her rock. They had met in college, a whirlwind romance that had settled into a deep, comfortable love. He was the calm to her storm, the steady hand on her back at industry events, the man who would listen for hours as she mapped out campaign strategies on their living room floor. He was, she believed, her soulmate, the father of her unborn child. The first crack in this porcelain existence appeared on a Tuesday. It was late, well past midnight. Isabella had been jolted awake by the baby kicking a now familiar and welcome intrusion. She smiled, rubbing her belly, and glanced over at Ethan. He was sound asleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. His phone, which was usually on his nightstand, was on the floor, having slipped from his hand. As she reached down to retrieve it, the screen lit up. A notification from an app she didn't recognize, a stylized flame icon. The message preview was short, but it was enough to stop the air in her lungs. Chloe, still awake. Can't stop thinking about last night. Your skin against mine. Isabella's blood ran cold. It was a physical sensation, a painful iciness that started in her chest and spread to her fingertips. She stared at the screen, her mind refusing to process the words. Chloe. The name was a foreign object, a piece of shrapnel embedded in the soft tissue of her life. Last night Ethan had been late. A last-minute client dinner, he'd said. He had come home smelling of expensive whiskey and a faint floral perfume that wasn't hers. At the time, she hadn't thought twice. She trusted him. Her first instinct was a tidal wave of raw primal rage. She wanted to shake him awake, to shove the phone in his face and watch his perfect features crumble into a mask of guilt. She wanted to scream, to shatter the quiet peace of their home, to let out the animalistic cry that was clawing at her throat. But then a different instinct took over. It was the CEO in her, the strategist who never made a move without first understanding the entire board. Screaming would give him the advantage. He would deny, deflect, gaslight. He would call her hormonal, accuse her of being paranoid because of the pregnancy. He would seize control of the narrative. No, she would not give him that. With hands that trembled almost uncontrollably, she picked up the phone. His thumb, limp and sleep, was all she needed. She pressed it against the home button. The phone unlocked. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, panicked bird. The app was a dating app, one known for discreet encounters. Their message history was a novel of betrayal. Weeks of it. Months. I've never felt like this with anyone, Ethan had written. When are you going to tell her? Chloe had asked just 3 days ago. Soon, baby. I promise. It has to be delicate. She's pregnant. The word delicate was a particular cruelty. He was handling the destruction of their marriage with the same detached care he would afford a sensitive stock portfolio, and the use of her pregnancy, their child, as a shield, as an excuse for his cowardice, that was the deepest cut of all. Isabella didn't sleep. She sat in the dark living room, the city lights a blur through her unshed tears. The rage was still there, a simmering cauldron in her gut, but now it was accompanied by a chilling, crystalline clarity. Divorce was inevitable. Her life as she knew it was over. But it would not end like this. She would not be the weeping, broken victim in this drama. She was Isabella Rossi. She built brands from nothing. She could surely orchestrate a demolition. She needed to know her enemy. The next morning she operated on pure adrenaline. She feigned a headache, letting Ethan fuss over her before he left for work, his kiss on her forehead feeling like the brand of a liar. The moment the door closed behind him, she was at her laptop. Chloe. The dating app profile was sparse, but it had a last name, Bennett. A quick search on social media brought her to an Instagram profile. Chloe Bennett. 26, pretty in a fresh-faced girl-next-door way, with a feed full of artistic photos of brunch cityscapes and selfies that radiated a hungry ambition. Her bio read graphic designer, dreamer, making things beautiful. Isabella felt a fresh wave of nausea. Making things beautiful. She was trying to make something beautiful on the wreckage of Isabella's life. With a few more clicks, Isabella found her professional portfolio online and then her LinkedIn profile. Chloe Bennett was a freelance graphic designer, talented even. Her aesthetic was clean, modern, and aligned perfectly with the kind of clients Aura represented. And that's when the idea began to form. It was a monstrous, terrifying, and utterly brilliant thought. It started as a whisper in the back of her mind, a flicker of vengeance so audacious it almost made her laugh. What if she didn't just watch Chloe from a distance? What if she brought her closer? What if she made this woman who was secretly trying to dismantle her life directly dependent on her for a paycheck? The plan was insane. Her best friend Amelia would have her committed, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt right. It was a move no one would ever see coming. It was a way to reclaim her power, not by ending the game, but by changing the rules so completely that she was the only one who knew how to play. She would learn every one of Chloe's weaknesses, her fears, her ambitions. She would see with her own eyes what Ethan saw in her, and she would do it all from the ultimate position of power as her boss. Her agency, Aura, just happened to have a job opening for a mid-level graphic designer. The listing had gone up last week. Isabella's fingers flew across the keyboard. She opened her work email, her expression hardening into a mask of pure, steely resolve. She found the generic HR email address listed on Chloe Bennett's professional website. Subject: Graphic Design Opportunity at Aura. Dear Ms. Bennett, my name is Isabella Rossi, CEO of Aura Marketing. I came across your portfolio online and was exceptionally impressed with the quality and creativity of your work. Your aesthetic aligns perfectly with the direction we are taking with several of our key luxury accounts. We currently have an opening for a senior graphic designer, a position that I believe would be an excellent fit for your talents. If you are interested in exploring this opportunity, I would like to invite you to our offices for an interview at your earliest convenience. I look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely, Isabella Rossi. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The email shot into the digital void, a declaration of war disguised as a job offer. She leaned back in her chair, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. The baby kicked again, a small internal flutter. "Don't worry, little one," she whispered to the empty room. "Mommy's got this." The war had begun, and Isabella Rossi was about to bring her enemy right through the front gates. 2 days later, Chloe Bennett walked into the polished, intimidatingly serene reception area of Aura Marketing. She clutched a leather portfolio to her chest, her chosen outfit a chic but professional black jumpsuit radiating a carefully constructed confidence. She was nervous, but it was the excited nervousness of a young professional on the cusp of a major career breakthrough. Aura was the big leagues. A job here working directly under the legendary Isabella Rossi was the kind of thing you dreamed about. She had been ecstatic when she received the email. Isabella Rossi herself had reached out. Chloe had bragged about it to Ethan over a clandestine lunch, her voice buzzing with excitement. "She said she was exceptionally impressed with my work. Can you believe it?" she'd gushed. Ethan had frozen for a second, a forkful of pasta halfway to his mouth. Isabella Rossi at Aura. "Yes, isn't it amazing?" "It's a small world," he'd said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He felt a prickle of unease, a strange convergence of his two separate lives that felt dangerous. But he'd quickly dismissed it. It was a coincidence. A bizarre, unnerving coincidence, but nothing more. He couldn't possibly tell Chloe that his wife was the CEO who wanted to hire her. The lie was too deep, the deception too entangled. So he simply said, "Wow, Chloe, that's incredible. You deserve it." Now standing in the heart of Isabella's empire, Chloe had no idea she was a pawn in a game she didn't even know was being played. The receptionist led her down a long hallway to a corner office with a floor-to-ceiling glass wall that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. And there she was, Isabella Rossi. She was even more formidable in person. Even heavily pregnant, she commanded the space. She was dressed in an impeccably tailored cream-colored maternity dress that looked like it cost more than Chloe's rent. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant bun, and her expression was one of cool, unreadable authority. She didn't rise. She simply gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Ms. Bennett, thank you for coming in. I'm Isabella Rossi." "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Rossi," Chloe said, her voice a little breathier than she would have liked. She noticed the wedding ring, a formidable diamond that seemed to catch and refract the light with an accusatory gleam. "Please have a seat," Isabella said, her voice smooth as silk yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. She didn't smile. The interview began with standard questions. Isabella asked about Chloe's design philosophy, her experience with specific software, and her previous freelance projects. Chloe, growing in confidence, answered fluently, opening her portfolio to showcase her best work. She was good. Isabella had to give her that. It made it all the more infuriating. Then Isabella's questions began to shift. The change was subtle, a scalpel slipping between the ribs. "Tell me about your long-term goals, Chloe. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Isabella asked, leaning forward slightly, her hands clasped over her baby bump. The subtext screamed in her own mind. "Do you see yourself in my house raising my child?" "I want to be a creative director," Chloe answered earnestly. "I want to be leading a team, shaping a brand's entire identity. I'm very ambitious." "Ambition is good," Isabella said, her gaze unwavering. "But it can make people reckless. How do you handle high-pressure situations? Say when you're dealing with a difficult client or when personal and professional lines get blurred." Chloe felt a flicker of unease at the phrasing. "I believe in maintaining professionalism at all times," she said carefully. "Clear communication and managing expectations are key. You have to keep things separate." "Oh, do you now?" Isabella thought, a bitter, silent laugh echoing in her head. "Like keeping your affair with a married man separate from his pregnant wife." "An excellent answer," Isabella said aloud, her face a perfect mask of corporate approval. She flipped a page in Chloe's resume, though she wasn't reading it. She had already memorized every word. "It says here you value dedication and building lasting relationships. How do you define loyalty in a professional context, Chloe?" The question hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Chloe shifted in her seat. "Loyalty is about commitment. It's about seeing a project through, about being trustworthy and having the company's best interests at heart. It's about honoring the faith that someone puts in you." Each word was a fresh stab in Isabella's heart. This woman could sit here in her office and speak of loyalty while actively trying to steal her husband. The audacity was breathtaking. Isabella felt the rage churning, but she channeled it into an icy calm. This was not about losing control. This was about taking it. "I see," Isabella said slowly, her eyes boring into Chloe's. "And what about when a situation becomes untenable? When you find yourself in a position that is ethically compromised? Do you walk away, or do you see it through, hoping for a different outcome?" Chloe's professional smile faltered. The questions were becoming strangely personal, intensely philosophical for a design job interview. She thought of Ethan, of the promises he'd made, of the stolen nights, and the guilt that sometimes gnawed at her. I believe in fighting for what you want," Chloe said, her voice hardening slightly, a flash of the defiance Isabella had seen in her Instagram bio. "If you believe something is worth it, you don't just give up." It was the confirmation Isabella needed. Chloe wasn't some naive girl swept up in a fantasy. She was a fighter. She had a goal, Ethan, and she was not going to back down. Isabella stood up, a clear signal that the interview was over. Chloe scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding. Had she blown it? Had she said something wrong? Isabella walked around the desk, her presence filling the room. She stopped directly in front of Chloe, close enough that Chloe could smell the expensive, subtle scent of her perfume. It smelled like power. "You're very impressive, Chloe," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "You're hungry, you're talented, and you're not afraid to fight for what you want. I like that." She extended a hand. "The job is yours. We can offer you a salary 60% higher than your current freelance rate, full benefits, and a significant signing bonus. We would need you to start Monday." Chloe was stunned into silence. She hadn't even discussed salary yet. It was an offer beyond her wildest dreams. The money, the prestige, the job itself, it was everything she had been working for. All her doubts vanished, replaced by a wave of triumphant elation. "Yes," she stammered, shaking Isabella's hand. Isabella's grip was firm, cool, and lingered a moment too long. "Absolutely yes. Thank you, Mrs. Rossi. Thank you so much. You won't regret this." Isabella finally allowed herself a small, tight smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and held a glint of something terrifying. "Oh, I know I won't," she said softly. As Chloe practically floated out of the office, dizzy with success, Isabella remained standing by the glass wall. She watched the younger woman's retreating back until she disappeared down the hall. She had done it. The fox was now in the hen house. But the farmer was waiting, holding the keys to the cage. The first part of her plan was complete. Now the real torture could begin. She placed a hand on her belly, a silent promise to her child. The game was afoot, and she was about to find out just how loyal and dedicated Chloe Bennet truly was, not just to her new job, but to her husband. Chloe's first week at Aura was a dizzying blur of new systems, new colleagues, and the intoxicating thrill of legitimacy. The office was even more impressive from the inside. She had her own spacious cubicle with a brand new top-of-the-line computer. Her colleagues were sharp, stylish, and welcoming. And the salary, her first paycheck, hit her account that Friday, a figure so substantial it made her feel giddy. This was it. This was the life she was meant to live. Her boss, Isabella Rossi, was an enigma. She was brilliant, demanding, and possessed an almost supernatural attention to detail. In meetings, she could dissect a campaign concept with surgical precision, her insights leaving everyone in the room scrambling to take notes. Chloe was in awe of her. She was also terrified of her. Isabella's management style was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as corporate rigor. On Chloe's first day, Isabella assigned her to a major new client, a high-end Swiss watchmaker. It was a huge vote of confidence, and Chloe was determined to prove herself. She poured her heart and soul into the initial branding concepts, working late into the night, fueled by ambition and takeout coffee. She presented her work to Isabella on Wednesday afternoon, her hands trembling slightly as she walked her new boss through the sleek, sophisticated designs. Isabella listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When Chloe finished, she stared at the presentation on the screen for a long, agonizing minute. "It's competent," Isabella said, finally, the word landing like a slap. "But it has no soul, Chloe. It feels generic. It's what anyone would do. I hired you because I thought you were exceptional, not competent." She pointed to a specific font Chloe had chosen. "This font, it's too soft. It suggests a lack of conviction. Start over. I want to see something with more strength by Friday morning." Chloe was crushed. She had thought the designs were her best work, but she nodded meekly, gathered her things, and returned to her desk, her face burning with humiliation. She spent the next 36 hours in a frantic caffeine-fueled haze, redesigning the entire campaign from scratch. Meanwhile, Isabella watched. From her glass-walled office, she had a clear view of the entire floor. She saw Chloe's shoulders slump in defeat. She saw her rubbing her tired eyes, and she felt a grim, satisfying twist in her gut. This was just the beginning. The torment was in the details. Isabella would casually walk past Chloe's desk while Chloe was on a furtive, whispered phone call, presumably with Ethan. Isabella wouldn't break her stride, but her presence was enough to make Chloe stammer and quickly hang up. One afternoon, Isabella called Chloe into her office. "I have a personal favor to ask," she said, her tone making it clear it was not a request. "My husband's company is hosting a charity gala next month. We handle the marketing pro bono. I need a stunning invitation designed, something classic, elegant." Chloe's blood ran cold. My husband. She had to design an invitation for an event hosted by her lover's company for her lover's wife. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. "Of course, Mrs. Rossi," she managed to say. "His name is Ethan Hayes." Isabella continued, watching Chloe's face for the slightest flicker of recognition. "He's a senior VP at Sterling Cross Capital. Perhaps you've heard of him." Chloe's heart hammered in her chest. She forced a neutral expression, a skill she was rapidly learning was essential for survival at Aura. I don't believe so, but I'll get right on it. Good, Isabella said, turning back to her computer. He's very particular. He'll want to see the proofs himself. The lie was seamless. Ethan had never seen a proof in his life, but it was the perfect excuse to create a pressure cooker. Life for Ethan was becoming increasingly confusing. The affair which had once been a thrilling escape was now a source of stress. Chloe was no longer the carefree, adventurous woman he had been drawn to. She was constantly exhausted and on edge. My boss is a nightmare, she complained during a hurried secret dinner. She's a slave driver, a perfectionist. She had me redo an entire campaign because she didn't like the conviction of the font. Then quit, Ethan said, exasperated. You don't need this job, Chloe. Quit, Ethan, are you crazy? This is Aura. The money is incredible and the name on my resume is priceless. I just have to stick it out. It's just, her husband is a client and I have to design this whole gala invitation for them. It's so awkward. Ethan almost choked on his wine. Her husband. She's married. Of course she's married. She's massively pregnant, for God's sake. I think she's due in a couple of months. I feel so bad for the guy, honestly. She must be impossible to live with. A cold dread washed over Ethan. A pregnant CEO named Isabella. A husband whose company was a client. It couldn't be. The odds were astronomical. He felt a desperate need to know his lover's boss's last name. What's her name? He asked, trying to sound casual. Isabella. I don't know her last name, everyone just calls her Isabella or Mrs. R. Chloe replied, oblivious. Anyway, I have to run. I have to pull an all-nighter to get this gala design perfect for Ethan Hayes. The name hit him like a physical blow. Ethan Hayes. She had said his name. He stared at her, his mind racing, connecting the dots with sickening speed. Isabella Rossi. Aura. Pregnant. His company. His name. It wasn't a coincidence. His wife had hired his mistress. The realization didn't come with a bang, but with a horrifying, silent implosion. He felt the floor drop out from under him. This wasn't bad luck. This was a plan. A deliberate, calculated, psychopathic plan. His brilliant, strategic wife, the woman he had underestimated, was playing a game so complex he couldn't even see the board. He looked across the table at Chloe, who was reapplying her lipstick, complaining about kerning and paper stock. She had no idea. She was a lamb being led to a slaughter she couldn't even conceive of. And he was trapped. What could he do if he told Chloe she would confront Isabella and the explosion would be catastrophic? If he confronted Isabella, she held all the cards. She could ruin him not just personally but professionally. His wife wasn't just angry. She was dismantling his life piece by piece from the inside out, and she was using his own mistress as the tool. The next few weeks were a living hell for both Chloe and Ethan. Isabella's cruelty became more refined. She would schedule last-minute emergency meetings on Friday evenings, forcing Chloe to cancel her plans with Ethan. She would praise Chloe's work in front of the entire team, only to rip it apart in private moments later. The ultimate twist of the knife came one Tuesday afternoon. Isabella buzzed Chloe on the intercom. "Chloe, could you come in here for a moment?" When Chloe entered the office, Isabella was on her speakerphone. "So I'll just meet you there around 7:30, honey," Isabella was saying. "Love you." "Love you too, Izzy," Ethan's voice replied from the speaker, a voice Chloe knew intimately. Chloe froze, her blood turning to ice water. That voice. It was Ethan's. There was no mistaking it. Izzy. That was his pet name for his wife. Isabella hung up the phone and looked up at Chloe, a picture of innocence. "Sorry about that. My husband," she said with a warm, wifely smile. "He can be a little needy. Now about the banner ads for the Sterling Cross Gala." Chloe stood rooted to the spot, her mind a maelstrom of confusion and horror. Ethan's wife was named Isabella, Izzy, and she was the CEO of Aura, the pregnant, terrifying, brilliant CEO who was making her life a living hell. It all crashed down on her at once. The coincidence. The strangely personal questions in the interview. The constant pressure. The impossible demands. The overheard phone call. This wasn't a job. It was a prison. A gilded cage she had gleefully walked into. She looked at Isabella, truly looked at her for the first time. The cool, appraising gaze, the faint knowing curl of her lip, the hand resting possessively on her pregnant belly. This wasn't a boss. This was a woman who knew everything. And in that moment, Chloe Bennet understood that she was not a participant in an affair. She was a character in a revenge plot. And the protagonist, the writer, and the director was the formidable, terrifying woman sitting right in front of her. The fear she felt was profound, a primal terror that went far beyond losing a job. She had vastly, catastrophically underestimated her enemy. The revelation shattered Chloe's world. The office, once a symbol of her success, now felt like a panopticon, a prison where the warden watched her every move with knowing, vengeful eyes. Every task, every email, every casual comment from Isabella was now laden with terrifying subtext. A request to pick up coffee was a test of her servitude. Praise for her work was a cruel joke. Criticism was a direct personal attack. Chloe began to unravel, her sleek ambition frayed into raw paranoia. She saw conspiracies everywhere. When a file on her computer was accidentally deleted by an IT glitch, she was convinced Isabella was behind it. When she was assigned the tedious task of archiving thousands of old image files, she saw it as punishment. She started making mistakes, typos, and important copy deadlines missed by a few hours. Her work, once her pride, began to suffer under the weight of her psychological torment. Her clandestine meetings with Ethan became fraught with a new kind of desperation. She knows Ethan. She knows everything. Chloe hissed, huddled together in a noisy, anonymous bar far from either of their usual neighborhoods. She called you on speakerphone right in front of me. She called you honey, and you called her Izzy. Ethan, who had been living with this dreadful knowledge for weeks, feigned shock. What? No. You must have misheard. There are lots of guys named Ethan. It was a weak, pathetic defense, and he knew it, but admitting he already knew would expose his cowardice, his complicity in her suffering. Don't lie to me. Chloe's voice cracked, tears welling in her eyes. Her name is Isabella Rossi. Your wife's name is Isabella. She's the CEO of Aura. It's all been a game. She's been torturing me, and you just let it happen. I didn't know, I swear. He lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Chloe, you have to quit. Now. Just walk away from it. And go where? She shot back, her fear turning to anger. She'll ruin me, Ethan. She's connected to everyone in this city. If I just walk out, she could blacklist me. I'll never work in this town again. You have to do something. You have to confront her. Fix this. Fix this. Ethan felt a surge of panicked fury. You're the one who started seeing a married man. I'm the one whose wife is orchestrating some kind of Machiavellian revenge plot. We are so far past fixing this. The argument spiraled, their hushed, angry whispers lost in the din of the bar. Their affair, once a secret, passionate escape, had become a toxic, claustrophobic trap, and Isabella was the one holding the key. Meanwhile, Isabella had an observer of her own. Her best friend Amelia, a sharp-witted corporate lawyer, had watched Isabella's transformation with growing alarm. She sat in Isabella's living room surrounded by baby shower gifts, her expression one of deep concern. Izzy, this has gone on long enough, Amelia said, her voice gentle but firm. I get it. He betrayed you. You wanted revenge. You hired the mistress. It's the plot of a crazy movie. But you're 8 months pregnant. You're toying with this girl, you're driving yourself mad with stress, and for what? To prove a point you've already won. You have all the evidence you need to divorce him and take him for everything he's worth. Isabella calmly folded a tiny onesie, her movements deliberate. It's not about the money, Mia. And it's not about proving a point. It's about control. He took the control away from me. He made me a victim. I am taking it back. I need to see this through to the end. And what is the end? Amelia pressed. What's your endgame here? You humiliate them both, and then what? You're still having a baby with this man. This level of vengeance. It leaves scars on everyone, including you." "I'm not the one who will be scarred," Isabella said, her voice dropping to an unnerving calm. "I'm the one holding the scalpel." But even Isabella was beginning to feel the strain. The constant performance was exhausting. The rage, which had once been a hot, motivating fire, had cooled into a heavy, cold stone in her chest. She wanted it to be over. But she couldn't just fire Chloe and divorce Ethan. It felt too simple, too anticlimactic. She needed a finale. She needed a checkmate. And then a new twist emerged, one that not even Isabella in her meticulous planning could have anticipated. It was a discovery that would change the entire nature of the game. Isabella had asked Chloe to consolidate all the files for the Swiss watch account onto a single external hard drive for a client review. It was another make-work task designed to keep Chloe busy and stressed. That evening, after Chloe had left, her face pale and drawn, Isabella took the hard drive into her office. She wasn't checking Chloe's work. She was looking for something else. A part of her, the strategist, wanted to know if Chloe had been careless, if she'd left any personal files on the drive. She plugged it into her computer. Nestled deep within a folder of stock images mislabeled as textures was a hidden folder. Its name was EH Financials. Isabella's breath caught. EH Ethan Hayes. With trembling fingers, she clicked it open. It wasn't just a few files. It was a treasure trove of corporate espionage. There were screenshots of Ethan's private work emails, scans of documents from his desk at Sterling Cross Capital, detailed spreadsheets analyzing his stock portfolio, his bonuses, even the projected value of his inheritance from his parents. But it was the last subfolder that made Isabella's blood run cold. It was labeled Divorce Scenarios. Inside was a series of documents that modeled out potential divorce settlements. There were calculations based on infidelity clauses, asset division in their state, and even speculative assessments of how much Isabella's company, Aura, was worth. Chloe hadn't just been sleeping with her husband. She had been systematically investigating his wealth planning for the eventual breakup and her subsequent payday. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a meticulously planned heist. The realization hit Isabella with the force of a physical blow. She had seen Chloe as a rival for her husband's affection, a homewrecker. But she was wrong. Chloe Bennett wasn't just a mistress. She was a predator. A grifter who had targeted Ethan, likely seeing him as an easy mark. The affair wasn't the goal. It was the leverage. Suddenly, the entire narrative shifted. This was no longer just about a husband's betrayal. It was about an attack on her family, her finances, her legacy, and the future security of her unborn child. Chloe wasn't some lovesick girl who deserved pity or even a simple, straightforward revenge. She was a calculating adversary who needed to be neutralized. A new ferocious energy surged through Isabella. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fury. Her plan had been about emotional revenge, about reclaiming her power. Now it was about something far more primal: protection. She looked at the evidence on the screen. Chloe had been using Aura's resources, its computers, its servers, to conduct this corporate espionage. She had been building a case against Ethan while on Isabella's payroll. This wasn't just infidelity, it was grounds for a lawsuit. It was a weapon. Amelia's words echoed in her head. "What's your endgame here?" Now, Isabella knew. The endgame wasn't just going to be a confrontation. It was going to be an annihilation. She had the means to destroy not just her husband's affair, but the mistress herself, professionally and legally. She carefully copied the entire EH Financials folder onto her own secure server, a digital smoking gun. Then she wiped the original from the hard drive, leaving no trace of her discovery. She leaned back in her chair, a chillingly serene smile gracing her lips for the first time in months. The game had changed. The stakes were higher, and her path forward was brutally clear. The launch party for the Swiss watch client was in 2 weeks. It was being held at a chic downtown art gallery. It was the perfect stage. Everyone would be there: her team, her clients, the city's media. And of course, her supportive husband Ethan would be by her side. And the project's lead designer, Chloe Bennett, would be running the presentation. It was time to plan the grand finale. The night of the Chronolux launch party was electric. The art gallery buzzed with the low hum of influential people, journalists, industry titans, and Aura's most valued clients, all sipping champagne and admiring the sleek watch displays. The event was the culmination of months of work, a testament to Aura's prowess, and a personal triumph for Isabella. She moved through the crowd, a radiant, formidable queen in her own court. She was dressed in a custom-made deep emerald gown that draped elegantly over her 8.5-month pregnant form. She didn't look tired or strained. She looked powerful, regal. At her side, playing his part, was Ethan. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, but a keen observer would notice the tension in his jaw, the sweat on his brow. He knew something was coming. The air around his wife was too calm, too charged. It was the unnerving stillness before a lightning strike. Across the room, Chloe Bennett was a nervous wreck. She was dressed in a severe black dress, trying to look professional, but her hands were shaking as she double-checked the presentation on a laptop behind the main stage. This party was supposed to be her crowning achievement, the moment her hard work on the Chronolux account paid off. Instead, it felt like her own execution. For weeks she had been trapped, working under the terrifying gaze of the woman she had wronged, forced to interact with her, to take orders, to even design the very invitations for this event that now felt like a stage for her own humiliation. Her plan to secure a comfortable future by leveraging Ethan had backfired spectacularly, landing her in a psychological prison. All she wanted was for this night to be over. Isabella had set the stage with the precision of a master director. She had given Chloe a critical role, not just running the main presentation, but also curating a behind-the-scenes digital display that would loop on screens around the venue. She had also, 2 days prior, orchestrated a piece of masterful disinformation. During a casual conversation with another senior staff member, loud enough for Chloe to overhear, Isabella had mentioned a massive last-minute investment deal Ethan's firm Sterling Cross was making in Chronolux, contingent on the success of the launch. She mentioned a 7-figure success bonus for Ethan personally. It was a complete fabrication, but it was the perfect bait. For a grifter like Chloe, the idea of Ethan receiving a huge, immediate cash windfall would be an irresistible lure, making her feel even more desperate about her precarious position. The main presentation began. The lights dimmed. Chloe, from her station at the back, started the slideshow. Images of stunning watches and evocative lifestyle shots filled the giant screen on stage. The presentation was flawless, a testament to Chloe's talent even under duress. When it concluded, the room erupted in applause. The CEO of Chronolux gave a short, effusive speech praising Aura and their brilliant team. Then he introduced the woman of the hour. And now I'd like to welcome the visionary behind this entire campaign, the CEO of Aura, Isabella Rossi. Isabella walked onto the stage, a picture of grace and power. The applause swelled. Ethan watched from the front row, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was it. Thank you, everyone. Isabella began, her voice resonating with warmth and authority. Thank you, Jean-Pierre, for your trust in us. At Aura, we believe that a brand isn't just a product, it's a story. It's about heritage, integrity, and most importantly, it's about trust. She paused, letting the word trust hang in the air. She smiled, a dazzling, brilliant smile that didn't reach her cold, focused eyes. Building something of lasting value, she continued, whether it's a brand or a life, requires an unwavering commitment to that trust. But sometimes that trust is broken. Sometimes the story you think you're living is revealed to be a complete fiction. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. This was not the standard corporate thank you speech. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He wanted to stand up to run, but he was frozen in his seat. Tonight we've celebrated a story of precision, elegance, and legacy, Isabella said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. But I want to share another story. A more personal one. It's a case study, if you will, in brand demolition. She gestured to the large screen behind her. The Chronolux logo vanished. In its place, an image appeared. It was a screenshot of a text message. Chloe, can't stop thinking about last night. Your skin against mine. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Chloe at the back of the room felt the world tilt on its axis. Her presentation remote clattered from her nerveless fingers. This couldn't be happening. "This is a message sent to my husband, Ethan Hayes," Isabella announced, her voice as clear as a bell, "from one of my employees." Another image flashed on the screen. It was Chloe's smiling, ambitious face from her LinkedIn profile. The audience turned as one searching for her. Chloe shrank back into the shadows, her face a mask of pure horror. "My husband," Isabella said, turning her gaze slowly to lock onto Ethan's. "The man standing by my side, building a life with me, waiting for the birth of our first child." Ethan looked up at her, his expression one of utter ruin. He was exposed, flayed open in front of his colleagues, his clients, the world. "But this story has another twist," Isabella continued, her voice hardening, "because I learned that this wasn't just a simple, sordid affair. This was a business transaction." The screen changed again. Now it displayed the files from Chloe's hidden folder. Spreadsheets titled EH Financials, documents titled Divorce Scenarios, a detailed analysis of Sterling Cross Capital's bonus structure. "You see," Isabella explained calmly, as if delivering a standard marketing report. "My employee, Ms. Chloe Bennett, wasn't just sleeping with my husband. She was using my company's resources to conduct a thorough financial investigation of him. She was planning to leverage her affair into a lucrative divorce settlement. It was a hostile takeover of my life, executed on my time and with my money." The room was utterly silent now, a tomb of shocked faces. All eyes were on Isabella, this heavily pregnant woman standing on a stage, calmly and methodically dismantling two lives with cold, hard evidence on a 20-foot screen. She finally turned her attention to the back of the room, her voice laced with ice. "Chloe, you once told me in your interview that loyalty was about honoring the faith someone puts in you. You told me you fight for what you want. I suppose I should thank you for showing me exactly what you believe is worth fighting for." She looked back at the crowd. "Security," she said, her voice ringing with finality. "Will you please escort Ms. Bennett from the premises? Her employment at Aura is of course terminated. We will be pursuing legal action for corporate espionage and theft of intellectual property." Two burly security guards began to make their way toward the back of the room where Chloe stood paralyzed and sobbing. Then Isabella's gaze fell upon her husband one last time. The look she gave him was not one of rage, but of cold, dismissive finality. It was the look you would give a stranger, a mistake that had been erased. "And as for you, Ethan," she said, her voice dropping yet audible to everyone in the stunned silence, "consider this your notice. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Amelia," she nodded to her friend in the front row, "you know what to do." With that, Isabella Rossi, CEO, wife, and mother-to-be, turned away from the wreckage she had wrought, placed a hand on her belly, and walked off the stage, leaving behind a tableau of ruin and the deafening sound of silence. The grand finale was over. Checkmate. In the aftermath of what the city's gossip columns dubbed the Gala of Annihilation, the lives of Ethan Hayes and Chloe Bennett were irrevocably shattered. Ethan was fired from Sterling Cross within a week, his reputation in the high-stakes world of finance reduced to ashes. The public humiliation was absolute. Chloe Bennett vanished. Faced with a lawsuit from Aura and complete professional ostracization, she disappeared from the city, her name becoming a cautionary tale whispered in marketing agencies and bars. Isabella, however, did not crumble. The divorce was swift and brutal, with the evidence from the gala making any contest by Ethan impossible. She was awarded a settlement that secured her future and her child's future tenfold. 3 weeks after the party, she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. She named her Sophia, meaning wisdom. 6 months later, Isabella stood on the balcony of her loft. The city sprawled before her, no longer just a symbol of her ambition, but a testament to her resilience. In her arms, Sophia gurgled happily, her tiny hand wrapped around Isabella's finger. Aura was more successful than ever, with clients clamoring to be represented by the woman who had demonstrated such breathtaking strategic command. She was a single mother, yes, but she was not broken. She had been betrayed, but she was not a victim. She had taken the shattered pieces of her perfect life and used them to build a new foundation stronger and more authentic than before. The cold fire of vengeance had been extinguished, replaced by the fierce, warm glow of a mother's love, and the quiet confidence of a woman who had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not only survived, but had emerged victorious on her own terms. The story wasn't a tragedy of a wife scorned. It was the origin story of a queen who had built her own throne. Isabella's story is a powerful, gut-wrenching reminder that the deepest betrayals can come from the people we trust the most. But it's also a story of incredible strength. She refused to be a victim. She took control of her own narrative and delivered a masterclass in justice. What do you think? Was Isabella a strategic genius who delivered a well-deserved reckoning, or did her quest for revenge go too far? Could you ever do what she did? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but for Catherine Vance it was served on a silver platter under the glittering chandeliers of her own Hamptons estate, with 200 of New York's elite as witnesses. She was the perfect wife to a self-made millionaire, a pillar of quiet elegance in a world of loud money. But when her husband Julian Croft raised a champagne flute to toast a new beginning, he wasn't toasting her. He was toasting his pregnant mistress. He thought it was a power move, the ultimate display of his invincibility. He didn't know that Catherine's smile was a war cry, and in her Hermes clutch she wasn't carrying lipstick. She was carrying his ruin. The air in the Hamptons in late August is different. It's thick with the scent of salt money and the quiet desperation of summer's end. For Catherine Vance, it smelled of betrayal. For the past 6 weeks, that scent had been her constant companion, clinging to the silk sheets in her marital bed, mingling with the expensive perfume on her husband's collars, and tainting the taste of the morning espresso she no longer shared with him. Their life from the outside was an Instagram-perfect fantasy. The sprawling contemporary mansion in Southampton, a glass and cedar monolith overlooking the Atlantic, was featured in Architectural Digest. Julian Croft, her husband, was the golden boy of tech finance, a millionaire many times over by 35 with a jawline as sharp as his business acumen. He hadn't been born into money, but he'd acquired it with a ferocity that both terrified and thrilled the old money establishment. Catherine, daughter of a respected but not extravagantly wealthy history professor, was his perfect counterpart. Graceful, intelligent, and possessing an understated elegance that made the new money wives look garish. She ran their homes, the Hamptons estate, the Park Avenue penthouse, with the precision of a CEO. She chaired the galas, charmed the investors, and smoothed over Julian's occasional brutishness with a serene smile. She was as Vanity Fair had once gushed the velvet glove on Croft's iron fist. For 7 years the arrangement had worked. She had loved him, or at least she had loved the man she thought he was. The ambitious, charming visionary who had swept her off her feet. In return, she had believed he loved her, but the last year had seen a slow, creeping corrosion. The late nights at the office became more frequent. Business trips to Singapore or Zurich were extended by days with flimsy excuses. He grew distant, his eyes glazing over when she spoke of her day, his hand reflexively pulling away when she reached for it. The first concrete clue was a receipt. It fell out of his briefcase one morning as he rushed out a crisp slip from a boutique she'd never heard of, La Petite Nouveauté. It was a high-end maternity store in Soho. The purchase, a cashmere nursing shawl, and a diamond-studded pacifier clip. The total was more than her father's monthly mortgage payment. Catherine felt the floor drop out from under her. They weren't trying for a baby. They hadn't been for years after a painful and private struggle with infertility that Julian had decreed they would no longer discuss. "We have a great life, Ellie," he'd said, his tone final. "Let's not complicate it." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone. She knew. In that instant she knew everything and nothing. The stray blonde hairs on his jacket, the hushed phone calls he took on the terrace, the second phone he thought he'd hidden so cleverly in his gym bag. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. Her first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to shatter the cold, perfect facade of their lives. But a deeper, colder instinct took over. The part of her that had watched her quiet, intellectual father be steamrolled by more aggressive colleagues her whole life. The part of her that had learned to navigate the shark-infested waters of New York society. That part whispered, "Not yet. Don't be emotional. Be smart." She called the only person she knew she could trust implicitly Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a partner at a white shoe law firm, a man whose quiet demeanor hid a mind like a steel trap. He had been her father's student at Columbia Law before he became a legal titan, and he'd always had a soft spot for Catherine, a paternal sort of protectiveness. They met in a discreet corner of the Carlyle's Bemelman's bar, the whimsical murals a stark contrast to the grimness of their conversation. Catherine laid it out, her voice low and steady, betraying none of the seismic terror she felt. The receipt. The second phone. The emotional distance. Marcus listened, his steepled fingers hiding his mouth. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he took a slow sip of his Macallan. "Catherine," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What do you want?" "I don't know," she whispered, the first crack in her composure. "Yes, you do," he countered gently. "You want to know who she is. You want to know the extent of the damage, and then you want to decide whether to scorch the earth or walk away quietly. My advice, prepare for scorched earth. With a man like Julian, there's rarely another option." He was right. Quietly walking away was not in Julian's vocabulary, and it wouldn't be in hers either. He had made a fool of her. He had desecrated the private grief of their infertility. He had built a secret life on a foundation of her trust. She wouldn't just walk away. She would take a wrecking ball to the entire edifice. "How do we prepare?" she asked, her voice hardening. "You do nothing," Marcus instructed. "You be the perfect wife. You smile, you host, you attend. You give him no reason to suspect that you know anything. In the meantime, I will engage a private investigator. A very good, very discreet one. We need photos, names, dates. We need to document every dollar of marital assets he spent on this new venture." And so Catherine the actress was born. She played the part of her life. She welcomed Julian home with a kiss, ignoring the faint, unfamiliar floral scent on his skin. She asked about his day, feigning interest in mergers and acquisitions while her mind raced with images of him with another woman. It was a harrowing, soul-shredding performance. The investigator, a former Mossad agent named Ari, was ruthlessly efficient. Within 2 weeks, Catherine had a name and a face. Serafina Monet, a 26-year-old art gallery assistant from a modest background in Queens. She was beautiful in a way that was the polar opposite of Catherine's classic grace. She was all flowing blonde hair, bee-stung lips, and a palpable hungry ambition in her eyes. Ari's photos were a gallery of gut punches, Julian and Serafina laughing in Central Park, his hand resting proprietorially on her swollen belly, the two of them entering a lavishly furnished West Village apartment, an apartment Ari discovered that was owned by a shell corporation funded by a subsidiary of Croft Enterprises. He wasn't just having an affair. He had built her a life, a parallel life funded by their joint assets. Marcus was clinical. "This is good, Catherine. This is leverage. The apartment is a clear violation of the financial clauses in your prenuptial agreement. It constitutes a fraudulent transfer of marital property." The prenup. Another one of Julian's brilliant ideas, signed a week before their wedding. It was an ironclad document that, in the event of a divorce, would leave Catherine with a respectable but, by his standards, paltry sum. A thank you for her time. It was designed to protect his empire. But Marcus had found a hairline crack in it. The fidelity clause, often considered archaic, was something her father had insisted on including. It stated that in the case of proven adultery leading to the birth of a child, the financial penalties against Julian would be severe. But proving it in a way that would trigger the clause was the challenge. "He will bury us in litigation," Catherine said, looking at the photos of Serafina, who was now visibly heavily pregnant. "Let him try," Marcus said. We just need the one perfect, undeniable moment of proof. Public acknowledgement is the gold standard. And then, as if delivered by the gods of vengeance themselves, Julian gave her that moment on a silver platter. He approached her one evening in the library of their Hamptons home. He was buzzing with an energy she hadn't seen directed at her in years. "Ellie, darling, I have a brilliant idea." He began pouring himself a brandy. "I want to host a party. End of summer. A real blowout. Here." Catherine kept her expression neutral. "Oh, what's the occasion?" "A celebration," he said, beaming. "A celebration of new beginnings. We just closed the Apex deal. It's a huge win. I want to toast the future of the company." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The Apex deal had closed 2 months ago. She looked at him at the practiced ease with which he lied to her face and felt a cold fury settle deep in her bones. She knew with chilling certainty what this party was really for. It was for her. It was a public coronation for his mistress. He was going to install her and their child into his life, and this party was the announcement. He was so arrogant, so convinced of her meek compliance that he was going to do it in their home. "A party," Catherine said, her voice smooth as glass. "What a wonderful idea, Julian. It should be a night no one will ever forget." His smile was triumphant. He had no idea how true her words would be. The planning began. Julian, for the first time, took an active interest. He wanted a marquee on the lawn, a jazz ensemble from the city, and catering by Jean-Georges. He insisted on a specific theme: new beginnings. He personally curated the guest list, a who's who of their world. Investors, rival society columnists, and the matriarchs who ruled the social scene. And he told her with a casualness that was almost comical he was inviting a few rising stars from the art world. "A new artist I'm thinking of patronizing," he'd said. "Serafina Monet. I think you'll like her." Catherine just smiled. "I can't wait to meet her." In the 2 weeks leading up to the party, Catherine didn't just play the part of the perfect hostess. She became a general planning a war. She and Marcus worked in secret late-night calls and encrypted emails, their new normal. Marcus filed the initial divorce petition to be held and served at the exact right moment. He hired a process server, a discreet man who would be disguised as one of the catering staff. They prepared the financial statements, the investigators' reports, the evidence of the Shell Corporation. It was a mountain of betrayal condensed into a single lethal legal document. Catherine also made a call to a name in her contacts list she hadn't used in years. Harrison Blake, the most feared and respected public relations specialist in New York, a man known for his ability to craft or destroy a narrative. She met him for a clandestine coffee and told him everything. He listened, a predatory glint in his eye. "So," he'd said, "you don't just want to divorce him. You want to utterly dismantle him, publicly. I like it. It's got style." On the day of the party, a strange calm descended upon Catherine. She spent the afternoon at a spa, not for relaxation, but for armor. Her hair was swept into a chignon so severe it was a statement. Her makeup was flawless, her red lipstick a slash of defiance. She chose her dress with surgical precision, a sleek column gown of midnight blue Tom Ford silk. It was beautiful but severe. It was not the dress of a happy wife. It was the dress of a woman going into battle. As she stood before the mirror, she saw not the trembling, heartbroken woman she had been 6 weeks ago, but a stranger she was coming to admire. This woman was cold, focused, and unbreakable. Julian Croft had intended to humiliate her. He was about to learn what a fatal miscalculation that was. He had forged his wife in the fire of his own betrayal, and now she was coming to collect. The marquee was a cathedral of white canvas and fairy lights on the vast emerald lawn, the Atlantic sighing in the distance. Inside, the air hummed with the sound of 200 of New York's most powerful people trying to out-talk, out-laugh, and outshine one another. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved like ghosts through the crowd, their silver trays laden with flutes of Dom Perignon and canapés that were miniature works of art. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, a smooth, decadent soundtrack for the unfolding drama. Catherine moved through the party with the practiced grace of a queen in her court. She greeted guests with a warm smile, and a light touch on the arm, her Tom Ford gown shimmering under the soft lights. People complimented her on the magnificent party on her home, on her impeccable taste. "You've outdone yourself, Catherine," gushed Blythe Carrington, a society doyen whose approval could make or break a social season. "Julian must be so proud. He's a man worth celebrating." Catherine replied, her voice smooth as silk, a hint of double meaning in her words that no one could possibly detect. She saw Julian across the lawn holding court. He was in his element, a magnate at the peak of his power. He wore a custom Brioni suit, his Patek Philippe watch catching the light. He was laughing, a booming, confident sound that always grated on her nerves. And standing just a little too close to him, bathed in his glow, was Seraphina Monet. She was exactly as she was in the photographs, but more vivid, more real. She wore a flowing white empire waist dress that did little to conceal her advanced pregnancy. Her blonde hair was a halo around her face, and she looked up at Julian with an expression of pure adoration. She was touching his arm, her hand resting there for a second longer than was appropriate. A few people noticed. Catherine saw the flicker of a glance between two rival hedge fund managers, the slight knowing smirk on a gossip columnist's face. The whispers were already starting. Catherine's heart gave a painful lurch, but she willed it into submission. Stick to the plan, she told herself. Let him do it. Let him hang himself. She caught the eye of the process server, a man named Frank, who was impeccably disguised as a senior waiter, his posture perfect, a white napkin draped over his arm. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He was in position. Marcus Thorne. Her lawyer was not present but was on standby a short drive away waiting for her call. Harrison Blake, the PR guru, had already drafted the press release that would be sent to every major news outlet the second she gave the word. The pieces were all in place. An hour into the party, Julian stepped onto the small stage where the band was playing and tapped a crystal glass with a spoon. The chatter slowly died down as the crowd turned their attention to him. He was beaming, his face flushed with champagne and triumph. "Friends, colleagues, thank you all for coming," he began, his voice booming through the microphone. "I know the invitation said this was to celebrate the Apex deal, and it is. It's a testament to the hard work of my incredible team." He paused for a smattering of polite applause. Catherine stood near the front, her expression a perfect mask of wifely pride. She could feel the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes on them, the power couple, the hosts of this perfect evening. But tonight, Julian continued, his voice taking on a more intimate, more emotional tone, is about more than just business. It's about the future. It's about new beginnings. His eyes scanned the crowd moving past Catherine without a flicker of recognition and landed squarely on Seraphina Monet. A collective silent intake of breath seemed to ripple through the marquee. The whispers grew louder. This was it. "Sometimes in life you make plans," Julian said, his gaze locked with his mistress's. "You build something, you think you know what your path is. And then something or someone comes along and shows you a new path. A more authentic one. A path towards true happiness and legacy." Catherine felt a cold, sharp calm settle over her. He was actually doing it. His arrogance was truly boundless. He was about to announce his affair and his illegitimate child in front of everyone who mattered in their world in her home. "I've learned that you have to be bold to get what you want in this life," he went on, raising his glass. "You have to be willing to tear down old structures to build something more beautiful and more meaningful." He was looking directly at Catherine now, a glint of challenge in his eyes. It was a public dismissal. He was tearing down their marriage right here, right now. "So I want to propose a toast," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "Not just to a new deal, but to a new life. To my new beginning. To the future mother of my child. To Seraphina." He raised his glass high. Seraphina, standing by the stage, had tears in her eyes. She placed a hand on her swollen belly, looking radiant and victorious. A stunned, deafening silence fell over the party. The jazz trio faltered. No one moved. No one clinked their glass. They just stared, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and for some cruel delight. They looked from Julian to the pregnant blonde, and then as one, their heads turned to the wronged wife. They turned to Catherine. They expected to see her crumble. They expected tears, a panicked retreat, a scene. They were disappointed. Catherine did not move a muscle. She held her serene smile, though it was now edged with ice. She let the silence stretch, letting the full weight of Julian's social suicide settle over the crowd. She let them absorb the sheer naked audacity of it. Then, with the calm, deliberate grace that had defined her for 7 years, she placed her untouched champagne flute on a passing waiter's tray. She walked towards the stage. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. Julian watched her approach, a flicker of uncertainty finally entering his eyes. He hadn't expected this. He had expected her to flee in humiliation. She reached the stage and took the microphone from his hand. He let her take it, a confused look on his face. She turned to the stunned audience. "Thank you, Julian," she said, her voice clear and resonant, carrying to every corner of the tent. There was no tremor, no hint of tears. Only a chilling, absolute control. That was quite the announcement. It takes a special kind of man to celebrate his future by demolishing his past so publicly. A nervous titter went through the crowd. "You're right," she continued, her eyes finding his. "Tonight is indeed about new beginnings. It's about tearing down old rotten structures to build something better." She gave the slightest, most subtle nod to her left. Frank, the process server, began to move. He walked with purpose, weaving through the frozen statues of the 1%, his path clear towards the stage. "You spoke of your new beginning, Julian," Catherine said, her voice dropping a little lower, drawing everyone in. "And I believe every person deserves that. Which is why I wanted to give you yours right here, right now, in front of all the people whose opinions you value so much." Frank had reached the stage. He stood beside a stunned Julian, holding a thick manila envelope. Catherine's eyes, cold and bright, locked onto her husband's. "My new beginning starts tonight. It starts with telling the truth. And it starts with this." She turned from the microphone and looked at Julian. "Julian Croft," she said, her voice now devoid of all warmth, "you've been served." Frank stepped forward and placed the envelope squarely in Julian's hand. The words, "Summons and Complaint Dissolution of Marriage," were visible on the front. A collective gasp swept the marquee. It was a sound Catherine would cherish for the rest of her life. Julian stared at the papers in his hand as if they were a snake. The color drained from his face. His jaw, that famous sharp jawline, went slack. He looked from the papers to Catherine, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Serafina let out a small, horrified cry. Her moment of triumph had curdled into a nightmare. Catherine leaned back towards the microphone for her final words to the captivated audience. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her smile finally reaching her eyes. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated victory. "Please enjoy the rest of the party. I believe I paid for it." And with that she turned, descended the steps of the stage, and walked, not ran, through the stunned, silent crowd. She didn't look back. She walked out of the marquee, out of her home, and out of the life that had been a beautiful, gilded cage. The salt-scented air of the Hamptons had never smelled so sweet. It smelled finally of freedom. The aftermath of the toast was not a quiet fallout. It was a nuclear explosion in the closed, gossipy ecosystem of New York's elite. Before Catherine's car had even reached the Long Island Expressway, Harrison Blake's press release had hit the inboxes of every journalist, from the New York Post's Page 6 to the Wall Street Journal. The headline was a masterpiece of controlled demolition. Catherine Vance files for divorce amidst husband Julian Croft's shocking baby shower announcement for mistress. It wasn't just a story about infidelity. It was a story about power, hubris, and a wife who had refused to be a victim. Catherine was painted not as a scorned woman, but as a strategic genius. The narrative was hers. Julian was trapped. By publicly acknowledging Serafina and the child, he had handed Marcus Thorne the silver bullet they needed. The fidelity clause in the prenup was now a ticking time bomb set to detonate under his financial empire. The first few days were a blur of frantic, furious phone calls from Julian. They went straight to a new number Catherine had, one only Marcus and a few others possessed. His voicemails were a case study in narcissistic rage cycling through disbelief threats, and then most pathetically desperate pleading. "Ellie, pick up the phone. You don't know what you're doing. You're destroying everything. You think you can pull this stunt and get away with it? I will bury you in court for years, Catherine. You will not see a dime more than what that prenup says. Okay, I messed up. It was a mistake. But we can fix this. We can be smart. Don't let these lawyers poison you against me. It's us, Ellie. It's always been us." Catherine listened to them once, a detached curiosity on her face, then deleted them. The us he spoke of had been a fiction, and she was done with his stories. Their war room was a sleek, soundproofed conference room in Marcus Thorne's midtown office, overlooking the spires of St. Patrick's Cathedral. The table was covered in documents, financial disclosures, bank statements, and the meticulously detailed report from Ari, the private investigator. "He's panicking," Marcus said, pointing to a series of panicked stock transfers Julian had made in the 48 hours following the party. "He's trying to move assets, hide them in offshore accounts and complex trusts. He's acting like a common criminal." "Isn't he?" Catherine asked, her voice dry. "Legally, he's just being stupid," Marcus replied with a thin smile. "Every transaction creates a digital footprint. He's so used to people being afraid of him that he's forgotten how to be careful. His arrogance is our greatest asset." Julian's legal team, a pack of snarling corporate litigators from a firm known for its scorched earth tactics, requested a settlement meeting. They met in a neutral location, a conference center that felt as sterile as a hospital. Julian was there looking haggard. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, coiled anger. His lead attorney, a slick man named Richard Sterling, laid out their offer. It was the exact amount stipulated in the original prenup. "This is a generous offer, Catherine," Sterling said condescendingly. "It allows you to walk away with dignity and avoid a long, unpleasant public battle." Catherine didn't even look at him. She looked directly at her husband. "Dignity?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You want to talk about dignity after what you did in our home?" Julian flinched. Marcus took over, his tone calm and professorial. "Richard, let's dispense with the theater. Your client, on a microphone in front of 200 witnesses, publicly acknowledged an affair that resulted in a child. This action triggers Section 11, subsection B of the prenuptial agreement, the infidelity clause. As such, the financial limitations of the agreement are rendered null and void. My client is entitled to 50% of all marital assets accumulated during their 7-year marriage." Sterling laughed, a short barking sound. "That's absurd. We will argue that Ms. Vance was aware of the relationship, that her actions at the party were a calculated, malicious act designed to inflict maximum damage. We will depose every friend, every staff member. We will paint her as a vindictive gold digger." "Go ahead," Catherine said, speaking for herself again. Her calmness was more unnerving than any outburst. "Depose my friends who listened to me cry about my husband's sudden business trips. Depose the staff who cleaned up the unfamiliar lipstick from his shirts. Depose the driver who dropped him off not at his office but at a West Village apartment building twice a week. And while you're at it, be sure to get a deposition from Serafina Monet. I'd love to hear her account of how my husband used funds from our joint accounts to pay her rent and buy her diamond pacifier clips." The room went silent. Julian stared at her, a dawning horror in his eyes. He had drastically underestimated her. He had seen her as a beautiful passive accessory to his life. He had never, not once, considered that she was paying attention. The meeting ended without a resolution, but a clear line had been drawn in the sand. The next front in the war opened as expected with Genevieve Croft, Julian's formidable mother. A woman carved from New England granite and old money. Genevieve cared about only one thing: the Croft family legacy. A messy public divorce was a stain on that legacy. She summoned Catherine to her cavernous, dimly lit apartment on the Upper East Side, a museum of ancestral portraits and suffocating tradition. "Catherine," she began without any preamble, "this foolishness has gone on long enough. You've made your point. You embarrassed Julian. Now it's time to be sensible." "Sensible?" Catherine asked, refusing the tea that was offered. "Was it sensible for your son to impregnate his assistant and announce it at a party in my home?" Genevieve waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelets clattering. "Julian is a man. Men are weak. They make mistakes. But the family, the name, that is what endures. This public spectacle you've created is damaging his business. It's damaging our name." "He created the spectacle," Catherine corrected her calmly. "I simply ended the performance." Genevieve's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" "What I am owed," Catherine said. "Justice." "Justice is a concept for poets." Genevieve sniffed. "I am talking about money. Name your price. I will write you a check myself to make this go away. Sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear gracefully." It was the ultimate insult. She was being treated like another one of Julian's mistresses, a problem to be paid off and discarded. The quiet professor's daughter in her rose again, but this time she was armed with fury. "With all due respect, Genevieve, you don't have enough money to buy my silence," Catherine said, rising from her chair. "Your son broke something and he's going to pay to fix it. Not you. Him. The name you're so worried about? He tarnished it. I'm just polishing my own." She walked out, leaving the Croft matriarch speechless for what was likely the first time in her 70 years. The battle raged on for weeks, a war of attrition fought through legal motions and discovery requests. Julian's team tried to bury them in paperwork demanding years of Catherine's personal credit card statements, her emails, her text messages, searching for any hint of indiscretion on her part. They found nothing. Catherine's life had been an open book. Her only secret had been her growing sorrow. Meanwhile, a new unexpected player was growing restless, Serafina Monet. The fairy tale Julian had promised her had vanished. The triumphant entry into society had turned into a public shaming. She was no longer the radiant mother-to-be. She was the homewrecker in a tabloid scandal. Julian, consumed by his legal battles and cratering reputation, was becoming distant and irritable. The funding for her lavish lifestyle began to dry up as his accounts were frozen and scrutinized. The West Village apartment suddenly felt less like a love nest and more like a gilded cage, much like the one Catherine had just escaped. Serafina was young and ambitious, but she wasn't stupid. She saw that Julian was a sinking ship, and she and her unborn child were tied to his ankle. She started to think about her own future, and she realized her greatest leverage wasn't with Julian, but potentially with his wife. One evening, Marcus Thorne received a call from a blocked number. "Is this Marcus Thorne, Catherine Vance's lawyer?" a young woman's voice asked, hesitant and nervous. "It is. To whom am I speaking?" "My name is Serafina Monet," the voice said, and Marcus almost dropped the phone. I think we need to talk." It was the twist neither he nor Catherine had seen coming. The mistress was about to become their star witness. The war was about to take a decisive and devastating turn. The designated meeting place was a grand suite at the Mandarin Oriental, a bastion of impersonal luxury high above Columbus Circle. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Central Park, but the panorama of autumn foliage felt distant and unreal. Inside the suite, the air was thick with a sterile, climate-controlled tension. Catherine sat on a plush velvet sofa, a cup of untouched tea cooling on the marble table before her. She was a statue of composure in a tailored Roland Mouret dress, but her mind was a whirlwind. Meeting the woman who had lived in the shadow of her marriage felt like a necessary yet deeply violating step. It was one thing to see photos, another to breathe the same air. Marcus Thorne stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his presence a calming, solid anchor in the room. "Remember, Catherine," he said, his voice a low murmur that didn't carry. "She is not your enemy today. She is a tool, a desperate one, and desperate tools can be the most effective." Catherine nodded, her gaze fixed on the door. "I know, Marcus, but it's difficult to separate the tool from the woman who slept with my husband." Before he could reply, a soft knock echoed. A hotel staff member opened the door to admit a figure swathed in a Burberry scarf and oversized Chanel sunglasses. Serafina Monet entered the room hesitantly, her high-fashion armor doing little to conceal her vulnerability. She was visibly more pregnant than before, and the confident radiance she'd displayed at the party had been extinguished, replaced by a pallor of exhaustion and fear. Her eyes darted around the opulent suite before landing on Catherine, and she visibly recoiled a small involuntary step back. I didn't know you would be here," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, a protective gesture. Catherine rose, not out of courtesy, but to meet her on equal footing. She felt a strange cold detachment. This wasn't the vixen from the photographs. This was a frightened girl who had placed a bad bet. "My life is being dismantled, Ms. Monet," Catherine stated, her tone glacial but even. "I find it's best to be present for the demolition. Please sit." Serafina perched nervously on the edge of an armchair, her designer handbag clutched in her lap like a life raft. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable until Marcus stepped forward, his professional demeanor cutting through the personal animosity. "Ms. Monet," he began gently, "you called us. You said you needed to talk. We're here to listen." Tears welled in Serafina's eyes, and she fought to keep them from spilling. "He's abandoned me," she said, the words a raw, broken confession. "Since the party, everything changed. The calls stopped. The money." He said his lawyers advised him to cease all contact and support, that every dollar could be used against him. "He called me a liability. Last week I received an eviction notice for the apartment. He promised me a life of family. He said our son would carry the Croft name with pride." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Now he calls me a complication he has to manage." Catherine listened unmoved. Every word was a confirmation of the man she now knew Julian to be. He didn't build things, he acquired them. And when they ceased to be valuable or became inconvenient, he discarded them. She and Serafina were in that moment simply different models of the same disposable commodity. "He's a coward," Catherine said, the words flat and factual. "He's a coward who hides behind his money. But that doesn't answer our question. What do you want from us?" Serafina's fear hardened into something new: resolve. She had been pushed to the edge, and now she was ready to push back. "I want to secure my son's future, a future that Julian is trying to erase. And I want to make sure he can never hold his promises over another woman's head again." She paused, taking a deep breath. "In return, I will give you the weapon you need to destroy him." With trembling hands, she opened her handbag. She didn't just pull out the burner phone and the ledger. She placed them on the table with the deliberate finality of a confession. The phone was a sleek, anonymous black rectangle. The ledger was bound in dark green leather, looking deceptively ordinary. "This phone," she began, pushing it forward, "is where he let his guard down. He thought it was untraceable. He sent hundreds of texts. He detailed his plans to leave you after the baby was born. He complained about the financial gymnastics required to fund my life without you noticing. He named accounts, he mentioned transfers. It's all there." Catherine's stomach clenched, but her face remained a mask. It was one thing to know, another to see the sordid details spelled out in her husband's own words. "And this," Serafina said, her hand resting on the green leather ledger, "is his pride and his folly." She looked directly at Catherine. "He showed it to me one night after a bottle of very expensive wine. He was trying to impress me, to show me how much more powerful he was than anyone knew. He called it his Bible, his shadow ledger. It's a handwritten record of every asset he's hidden from you, from his company, from the IRS. Shell corporations, offshore accounts, real estate in names that don't exist. A cryptocurrency wallet he bragged was purer than gold. He said it was his real empire, the one the world could never touch." Marcus picked up the ledger, his movements precise. He opened it, his eyes scanning the neat columns of Julian's arrogant script. A low whistle escaped his lips. He looked up first at Serafina, then at Catherine, and in his gaze, Catherine saw the entire landscape of the war shift. This wasn't just a bigger gun. It was a nuclear code. "This isn't just leverage, Catherine," Marcus said, his voice charged with a new lethal intensity. "This is a kill shot. The infidelity clause would have cost him a fortune. This is proof of systemic long-term financial fraud and perjury. He signed financial disclosures in your divorce proceedings, swearing under oath that he had revealed all his assets. This ledger proves he is a liar and a felon. If this is authenticated and Ms. Monet testifies to its origin, he won't just lose the divorce case. He'll face a federal investigation. He could go to prison." The weight of the ledger on the table seemed to suck all the air out of the room. This went beyond marital betrayal into a realm of criminality that could utterly annihilate the man Julian Croft presented to the world. Catherine's gaze fell on Serafina, who looked pale but resolute. "Why?" Catherine asked the question softer this time, colored with a grim curiosity. "Why give us this? You could have used it to blackmail him yourself." Serafina shook her head, a single tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. "Blackmail would keep me tied to him forever, waiting for the next check, living in fear. I don't want his money that way. I want freedom. For me and for my son. He used me to wound you. He planned to use our child as a pawn in his dynasty, but my son will not be a tool for a man like that. He will be safe. That is all I want." The raw sincerity in her voice was undeniable. She was not an ally, but her goals had aligned perfectly with Catherine's. An agreement was drawn up by Marcus right there in the suite. It was not a payoff. It was a carefully structured legal document creating an irrevocable trust for the benefit of baby boy Monet. The funds would be substantial enough for education and a secure start in life, managed by a neutral third-party bank and inaccessible to both Serafina and Julian. In exchange, Serafina would turn over all evidence and provide a sworn affidavit attesting to its authenticity, ready to testify if needed. She signed her name with a hand that was finally steady. Her war was over. Catherine's was about to reach its endgame. The final settlement meeting felt like the prelude to an execution. Julian arrived with his lawyer, Richard Sterling, attempting to project an air of weary impatience, as if Catherine's persistence was merely a nuisance. He had lost weight, and the dark circles under his eyes were not well concealed by concealer. He refused to look at Catherine. "Let's get this over with." Sterling began sliding the same old offer across the polished mahogany table. "This is our final offer. Take it or we'll see you in court for the next 5 years." Marcus Thorne let the offer sit there untouched. He smiled a thin, chilling expression. "Richard, I appreciate your commitment to theatrics, but the show is over." He reached into his own leather briefcase and produced a single high-quality photocopy. He didn't slide it. He placed it gently in the center of the table. It was a page from the Shadow Ledger, the one detailing a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands named JEC Holdings. Julian Catherine Croft, with a valuation of over $30 million in bearer bonds and property. Julian's handwriting was as clear as day. Julian's eyes fell to the paper. The change was instantaneous and catastrophic. The blood drained from his face, leaving a waxy gray sheen. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. He stared at the page as if it were a venomous snake, his carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. His gaze shot up wild and panicked, not to Marcus but to Catherine. The question was in his eyes. "How? Where did you get this?" he stammered, his voice a strangled, unfamiliar sound. "The source is now our privileged work product," Marcus said, his voice dropping to the cold, clinical tone of a surgeon. "What matters is that we have the entire ledger. We have text messages corroborating the deliberate, fraudulent hiding of marital assets. Your client Richard has committed perjury on a scale that would make a hardened criminal blush. So we can discuss your offer, which is based on a fraudulent financial landscape, or we can discuss our new terms. Alternatively, I can walk this ledger over to the U.S. Attorney's Office this afternoon. I'm sure their white-collar crime division would be fascinated." Sterling looked from the paper to his client's imploding face and back again. The fight was gone. The shark had been harpooned. Marcus slid a new, thicker document across the table. Our terms are not negotiable. My client will receive 60% of the total marital estate, both declared and as yet undeclared. We have a forensic accounting team ready to verify the ledger's contents. She will retain sole ownership of the Park Avenue penthouse and the Hamptons estate free and clear. The art collection is hers. Julian will be responsible for all tax liabilities arising from his creative accounting. Sign this today and the ledger remains a private matter between us. Hesitate, and it becomes a public record. It was total unconditional surrender. Julian was shaking his hands, trembling. He looked at Catherine, his eyes finally begging, searching for a trace of the woman he had married. The woman who had once loved him, forgiven his moods and propped up his ego. Ellie, please, he breathed the name, a desperate plea. Don't do this. Catherine leaned forward for the first time, her voice low, precise, and utterly devoid of pity. Do it, Julian. Expose a liar, a thief, a man who would humiliate his wife and then abandon his pregnant mistress when she became inconvenient. No. I'm not doing anything to you. I am simply collecting on the debt you created. She paused, letting the words sink in. You toasted to your new beginning. It's only fair I get to start mine. Sign the papers. Defeated, broken, and utterly outplayed, Julian Croft picked up the heavy gold pen his lawyer offered him. His signature, once a bold, decisive slash, was now the barely legible scrawl of a beaten man. He signed away his empire, his reputation, and his power, all with a few strokes. Catherine stood without a word. She didn't look at the papers. She didn't look at Julian. Her business there was concluded. With Marcus at her side, she walked out of the conference room, leaving the architect of her misery to sit amongst the ruins of his own making. The war was over. She had won. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a cheating husband and a vengeful wife. It was a story about the masks we wear and the price of taking them off. Julian Croft built an empire on an image of invincibility, but it was a house of cards brought down by his own hubris. Catherine Vance wore the mask of the perfect passive wife until she was pushed too far. She discovered that her greatest strength wasn't her grace or her beauty, but the quiet, meticulous intelligence her husband had always overlooked. She didn't just get revenge. She got justice, reclaiming her narrative and her future. Her story is a powerful reminder that the most formidable power often lies not in shouting, but in planning, waiting, and knowing exactly when to strike. If this story of strength and strategy resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to rebuild from the ashes. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life dramas just like this one. What did you think of Catherine's final move? Let us know in the comments below.